Meeting of the Boston School Committee. I'm Chairperson Jerry Robinson. The committee just returned from an executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Plant Administrators Association and the Boston Association of School Administrators and Supervisors, also known as BASIS. To have this discussion in an open meeting could have a detrimental effect on the committee's bargaining position. I want to welcome everyone who is joining us tonight in person, on Boston City TV, and on Zoom. I'm going to ask everyone here in the chamber to please turn off the volume on your laptops or other devices so it does not interfere with the audio for tonight's meeting. Thank you for your cooperation. Tonight's meeting documents are posted on the committee's webpage, bostonpublicschools.org/school-committee, under the September 27th meeting link. For those joining us in person, you can access the meeting documents by scanning the QR code that's posted by the doors. The meeting documents have been translated into all of the major BPS languages. Any translations that are not ready prior to the start of the meeting will be posted as soon as they're finalized. The meeting will be rebroadcast on Boston City TV and posted on the school committee's webpage and on YouTube. The recording will be available in all of the BPS languages. The committee is pleased to offer live, simultaneous interpretation virtually in Spanish, Haitian Creole, Cabo-Verdeano, Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, and American Sign Language. The Zoom interpretation feature has been activated. Zoom participants should click the globe icon at the bottom of your screen to select your language preference.
Excuse me, Chair. The Zoom portion of the meeting, they're having trouble with the audio, so maybe we should pause for just a moment and see if we can catch up so the home audience can listen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Amongst yourselves.
When's your first meeting? With that, you're right.
We still have to, I think, do the, before we schedule something else.
Yeah. So, you're looking, we did one for my son, and I really liked, I thought the psychologist was good, and
Okay.
here, and did a really good analysis on insurance, which is rare, as you're finding.
Test 1, 2, 3.
But if you don't, just,
Test 1, 2, 3.
So, yeah, that's a whole story. I'll tell you, it's a whole story, but Adam, this was now, like, he was
We're all set, Chair. Thank you.
happened, but
We going?
Ready to go.
All right, thank you.
Newton Wellesley
The committee is pleased to offer live simultaneous interpretation virtually in Spanish, Haitian Creole, Cabo Verdeano, Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, and American Sign Language. The Zoom interpretation feature has been activated. Zoom participants should click the globe icon at the bottom of your screen to select your language preference. I'd like to remind everyone to speak at a slower pace to assist our interpreters. Before we begin tonight's school committee meeting, I want to take a moment to address my comments at the last meeting on Wednesday, September 13th. I made impromptu remarks about the state of Boston Public Schools in the context of the Superintendent Skipper's evaluation. After more than 2.5 years of remote meetings, I spoke from the heart in front of a room full of dedicated, hardworking people that I had not shared space with for a long time. I saw the faces of educators, staff, and many others who share a common goal to provide the children of this city with the best education possible. I was moved to address them directly. I won't say my words were taken out of context. I'm more experienced than that. But I will say that my words were used to help promote a negative narrative about the BPS, a narrative that is not in the best interest of children or productive to the youth of our city. It's a narrative that is divisive, destructive, and self-serving. As a seasoned professional, I know that there is a risk of deviating from the script, but I thought it was important in that moment to remind everyone watching the meeting, either in person or at home, that Superintendent Skipper cannot do this work alone. Neither can the most dedicated teacher, staffer, or school committee member. This work is too big, too deep, and too complex for any one person to fix. We don't have ideal choices before us, but it's not an option to do nothing. As a Black woman who has lived in this city for my entire life, who has seen and experienced, both as a student and as a parent, the racism and challenges our district faces, this work is personal and is why, in my years of retirement, I'm still here. I'm here right now because I don't want us to continue to fail our children. I'm here right now because there is real work to do, and all the adult drama is not more of what our children need. Our city's children need the support of all of us. As I said last week, every single person in Boston has a role to play here. There are people who choose to be the critics, choose to point out only the negative, people who choose not to be part of the solution. I spent decades doing this work, and I am fully aware that there are people cheering for BPS's failure because it personally benefits them. No matter what we say or do, there are going to be people who will always disagree. I know I cannot stop all the negativity, but we must discern the difference between the legitimate concerns and criticism and the toxic grandstanding. For too long in Boston, toxic voices that do not move us forward have been the loudest voices in the room. And to that I say, enough. The district is at a crossroads. We are trying to be responsible for fixing over 100 years of neglect. Now is the time to work with urgency to right the wrongs of the past and address the deep systemic problems. There are dedicated public servants who are moving this district forward. It's not always easy to see the progress, but progress must be our measurement of success. And progress is happening. Just look at the start of this year. There are so many improvements from last year. Are they where we want everything to be? No. But did we do better than last year? Yes. I love the city. I love our children. And often, despite what my family and friends have advised, I'm going to still be here for the long haul. As chair, I understand it's my role to push the district and hold people accountable. But I'm also here to say to this superintendent, I've got your back. And to all of the district and school-based staff, I've got your back too. This is an invitation to join us in this work. Let's focus on the big and bold work our kids deserve, and no matter what the noise is, we'll still be here. Thank you. We'll now move on to the approval of minutes. I'll now entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the September 13th, 2023 school committee meeting as presented. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Is there any objection to approving the motion by unanimous consent? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. We'll now move on to superintendent's report. I present to you our superintendent, Mary Skipper.
Thank you, Chair Robinson, and good evening to everyone. It's a nice packed house. It's nice to see everybody in person. So on Tuesday, September 19th, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESE, released the 2023 accountability results for schools and districts across the state and for school year 2022 and 2023. This is known as MCAS, Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System for data. Tonight, I will provide some high-level takeaways from the results. My team will present in full on the MCAS at next week's meeting, which will happen on Wednesday, October 4th, and we will take a much deeper dive into the data. Boston's data showed that performance is beginning to rise after the decline in performance due to the pandemic. In the state's accountability system, the district was not identified as requiring assistance or intervention and deemed to be making substantial progress toward targets, meeting 51% of its improvement targets. The district earned the same rating as 141 other districts in the state, as you can see from the bottom table. The district exceeded targets for reducing chronic absenteeism in all grade levels and demonstrated typical growth in ELA and math in all grade levels. Across the district, 53 schools were identified as not requiring assistance or intervention, and 4 schools were named schools of recognition: the Tynan and Perry schools in South Boston, the John F. Kennedy and Manning schools in Jamaica Plain. Schools of recognition are identified by DESE as schools that met or exceeded their targets and also had both high achievement and high growth. This data provides information that will help guide us as we continue to support students and schools in making up for the time lost in the pandemic. I'm very encouraged by the strong progress we see in math, particularly with our students with disabilities and former English learners. We will use this information to enhance what is working and make changes where we need to see greater improvement. We know there is room for growth, and this data is helpful in informing our path forward. BPS has worked this year to create strong systems to support our academic work and vision. And as we rebuild and solidify our foundation after the interruption of the pandemic, I expect to see acceleration in improvement. Our regional model allows school superintendents to dig into the MCAS data and analyze it with teachers and at the schools. This will help us ensure that individual schools are getting the support they need. This school year is the year that we will see these new systems begin to bear results as they gain more traction. We have to keep our focus on closing not only the gaps created by the pandemic, but also the persistent gaps for our most marginalized students, our Black and Brown students, our special education students, our economically disadvantaged, and our English language learners with and without disabilities. And we are committed to providing all students with high-quality, culturally affirming instructional materials across all content areas, specially designed instruction so students can access those materials, and inclusive environments for all students. A little update on the summer. So we're currently working on summer 2023 final report, which will be completed at the end of October. Tonight I want to share some of the high-level data collected about our programs, which took place between July 10th and August 11th. More than 10,600 young people participated in our summer programming, which included fifth quarter, credit recovery, and extended school year. In fifth quarter, we had 58-59. In credit recovery, we had 24-26. And in ESY, we had 23-90. I'm highlighting the credit recovery because this was critical to our high school students beginning to get back on track. In total, that's an increase of more than 2,000 new students participating in our fifth quarter portfolio. And we expanded the diversity and the quality of our programs. We added 130 summer learning academies, which is a 25% increase in programming, 6 new school-based summer learning academies, and 12 new community-based organizations. This summer also marked the first year of a pilot for ESY inclusion, with almost 300 students opting into fifth quarter summer programming. This was the second year of our projects-based learning curriculum, which provided the opportunity to explore real-world, career-based projects based on the Common Core standards. From learning about tiny house architecture, to stormwater analysis, to aircraft design, food truck management, our students were introduced to a variety of fun, enriching, hands-on projects while learning about interesting career paths. Most of our fifth quarter programs made the city their classroom by offering Friday field trips to destinations like the Museum of Science, the Arnold Arboretum, the U.S. Constitution, and the Embrace sculpture. We are finalizing a memo for the school committee where we will share the academic student outcomes and the impact results of our summer programming on student achievement. And I look forward to sharing with you soon as it's prepared. Enrollment remains very healthy. Total enrollment as of yesterday, is 48,153 students. BPS has welcomed 5,758 new students since July of this summer. We anticipate this number will change as we continue to adjust rosters, contact homes for students who did not report, more students enroll. This is a fluid number, but I will continue to update at school committee as that number changes. We anticipate our rosters finalizing, and so at the next, over the next month or so, I'll be able to give more final numbers for what the enrollment for the year will look like. I'm proud to share that you've all heard of the Ed Vestor School on the Move Prize. This year, 3 of our BPS high schools are nominees. Congratulations to East Boston High School, to Fenway High School, and to Boston Green Academy. School leader Matt Holzer and BJA board chair Alex Chu will be here this evening. The winner will be announced November 8th. It's an exciting time. It's sort of our Emmys in a way, right? Or Academy Awards. And so we just were proud of all of the schools that were nominated, and we look forward to seeing who the winner is. I also want to congratulate Dr. Yasmin Gay, Assistant Superintendent in BPS Office of Opportunity Gaps, who received the 2023 Joseph R. Biden Jr. Presidential Lifetime Achievement Award, which was presented during the Congressional Black Caucus in DC this past weekend. Yasmin, congratulations. Last week, I had the privilege of attending Boston's Latino Heritage Breakfast, which was sponsored by El Mundo. It was really great to see so many friends and colleagues from the past and current celebrating the contribution of our city's Latina and Latino leaders and trailblazers. Our students have incredible role models within the community. It was wonderful to be able to celebrate it together. Our organization is stronger and better when we have community members within and outside of our organization that represent the full diversity of our communities. I look forward to recognizing BPS's diverse Latino employees with a celebration here at the Bowling Building in October. This past Saturday, members of the BPS Equity, Family, and Community Engagement team volunteered at the 10th Annual Boston Teachers Union Book Fair. BTU members gave away tens of thousands of books to BPS students and their families. Chair Robinson, Deputy Superintendent Ana Tavares, as well as Mayor Wu, Jessica Tang, President of the BTU, and Councilor Julia Mejia were all present at the book fair, and we thank them for their representation. Honestly, what better way for the BPS community to celebrate a new school year than encouraging our students to develop a lifelong love for reading? On September 18th, we announced the expansion of Advanced Placement African American Studies to 10 BPS schools. This initiative gives students of all backgrounds the opportunity to grow their knowledge and appreciation of people who are foundational to this country. We are committed to providing a rich, culturally affirming educational experience. We want to empower our students so that they will explore the complexities and contributions of Black history and culture. The 12 educators teaching the course attended the AP African American Studies Pilot Summer Institute, hosted at different locations nationwide, including summer institutes led by the College Board. As part of training, teachers participated in professional development, including at Howard University and Western Kentucky University. We hope in the future to use the knowledge of this inaugural group of teachers and ongoing professional learning to build successful programming across a larger community of our schools. I would also like to shout out Mr. Cannell Cloyd at the Henderson Inclusion School for receiving the Barbara Henry Award. This is a prestigious award given to brave educators who continue to persevere in education and commitment to all students. Congratulations to Mr. Cloyd. I'm going to have an opportunity to see him tomorrow. October is also College and Career Month. In partnership with Success Boston and the Boston Foundation, BPS features events, activities, and resources specifically designed to encourage and empower all students and their families in education and career planning process. One way we mark this month is through the annual citywide College, Career, and STEM Fair, which is held in conjunction with Mass STEM Week. The College, Career, and STEM Fair will be held on Saturday, October 21st, 2023, from 10 until 1:30 at the Reggie Lewis Track and Athletic Center. This is one of the best fairs to go to. It's just it's so important for our young people to be exposed and to see themselves and think about college and career at a pivotal time of their life. If you can go, it's a great take-in, October 21st. The goal of the fair is to showcase all of the city's varied and helpful resources designed to get students prepared for, enrolled in, and through college. This year, there will be 150 exhibits, ranging from local colleges and universities to employers offering internship opportunities, STEM agencies, and organizations in the city offering free college prep services. I wanted to make sure that everybody was aware, as you may have heard, the MBTA will be conducting important track maintenance on the Ashmont branch of the Red Line starting Saturday, October 14th, and it'll run through Sunday, October 29th. The MBTA will be running shuttle buses for the Ashmont branch between JFK UMass, it's my stop, and Ashmont Station. The MBTA will host a dedicated BPS community meeting, in addition to several public meetings to provide construction details and gather community feedback on Thursday, October 5th, from 6 until 8 p.m. on Zoom. The MBTA will be also posting updates on their website, which you can go to www.mbta.com for more information. Members of the BPS operations and transportation teams have been meeting weekly with the MBTA to prepare for the interruption and will remain in close communication throughout the project. BPS has notified our families and school communities about the Red Line disruption and the October 5th meeting. A rider's guide on the Red Line closure was shared with all families to help them prepare for it and for their commute. And the MBTA will have travel ambassadors at the impacted stops to further assist riders. And finally, as I close out tonight, I want to take a minute to recognize Annie Chin and thank her for all her work during her time at BPS. She's moving to a new role that she's very excited about in the city as the Chief of Staff for BCYF. So she won't be too far away and will continue, most importantly, to have the opportunity to impact our youth in the city together. Annie, if you could stand. Madam Chair, that concludes my report.
Thank you. I'll now open it up to questions and discussion from the committee. I'd like to remind colleagues about our agreed-upon norm that we each have 5 minutes, 1 to 2 questions. And I'd like to remind BPS staff to also be brief in your responses. Questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair, y thank you, Superintendent, por el reporte. Me parece, aplaudo mucho que vamos a tener 5,798 nuevos estudiantes en BPS.
I'm very grateful to hear the news that we're going to have 5,798 new students being part of BPS. I applaud this. I'm very happy about that.
Pero quiero compartir con ustedes una pequeña historia que lo viví personalmente con mi sobrino que llegó de República Dominicana.
However, I'd like to share a story that I lived in person regarding my nephew that arrived from the Dominican Republic.
Y en base a esa historia voy a hacer varias preguntas.
And based on that story, I'm going to make several questions.
Mi sobrino tiene 6 años y inscribirlo en BPS no fue difícil. Tuve las atenciones de un call center que nos trataron muy bien. A mi hermana hicieron un trabajo maravilloso. La señora Gladys, que fue que nos atendió y nos explicó el sistema y las escuelas.
So my nephew is only 6 years old. I did not have any trouble registering him. They were very receptive to me. Ms. Gladys at the call center, everybody was very helpful. They helped us very much.
Y la escuela donde él fue asignado fue la escuela Toby.
And the school that he was assigned to was the Tobin School.
Mi sobrino no sabe nada de inglés, viene de República Dominicana. Y el primer día le tocó una maestra que habló español. Eso estuvo bien.
So there was something very positive. My nephew, he does not speak a word in English. As a matter of fact, the first day, he was lucky that he had a teacher who spoke in Spanish, which is a very good thing.
Pero algunas de sus maestras no hablan nada de español.
But we have to consider that some of his teachers do not speak any Spanish.
Mi sobrino es curioso y el tercer día que fue a la escuela dijo que no quería volver más.
So my nephew is very curious about this, and 3 days after he started school, he said he did not want to go back to school.
Llorando, se tiró al piso y dijo, yo no quiero porque nadie habla mi idioma, solo mi maestra, y ella no fue hoy a la escuela.
He was very sad. He was crying. He threw himself on the ground. He said, I don't want to go back to the school. Nobody speaks English, nobody speaks Spanish, just my teacher.
Y ahí va mi reflexión.
So that is where my reflection comes.
¿Cuál es el plan que tiene el distrito educativo para estas familias, de estas 5,798 familias que están entrando a Boston Public School, que no hablan el idioma español, que no hablan inglés? ¿Cuál es el plan, el seguimiento?
So that is precisely where my question comes. What is the plan that BPS has in order to absorb these families that do not speak English, that are entering the system? What is the plan that you have in place?
Yo sé que la historia de mi sobrino no es única. Yo sé que hay muchos de estos 5,798 estudiantes que están llegando a BPS. Me imagino, y sé que tendrán ustedes las estadísticas, que de hecho las quiero, me imagino que habrá muchas familias aprendices del idioma inglés.
So among these 5,798 students, I do not believe that my nephew is a unique case. Perhaps you probably have these statistics, numbers that I'll be interested in learning from about these families that are in the same position that my nephew is.
Algunas de estas familias hoy están conectadas en esta reunión y quisieran saber qué podemos hacer, cuál es el plan. Yo llegué, tengo un seguimiento, hay una persona que me da apoyo socioemocional para que mi hijo y yo podamos enfrentar este cambio de cultura, este sistema.
So there are many persons in this situation. There are many persons perhaps participating in this meeting that we're having today. They're asking themselves the same question. What is the plan? Is there a contact person? Is there a person that is going to follow up? How are we going to be incorporated into the system?
Y quiero volver a la pregunta, de esos 5,798 estudiantes, ¿cuál es el porcentaje o cuántos que entraron a BPS son aprendices del idioma inglés?
So the question remains, out of this population of 5,798 students that just entered the BPS system, how many of those are English language learners? That is the question.
Through you, Chair. So thank you for the question, Ms. Blanco Garcia. So of the students since August 1st, we know about 1,300 are recently arrived immigrants that we have enrolled. I can go back since July 1st, which is the bigger number, and see the exact proportion. We are not alone in the state right now with so many recently arrived immigrants coming in a much larger number than what districts planned for. We are trying hard to hire more ESL teachers and more bilingual teachers to be able to serve the population. I am going to ask, because I think it's important to talk about the process of when a student first comes to the enrollment center, what happens. So Dr. Tavares, I'm going to just ask you and actually Dr. Chen to just come in, because you both, your parts of the organization hold a critical role both in welcoming our families and in testing our students so that we place them appropriately.
Good evening.
So maybe we can start with the welcoming, when a student first comes to the Welcome Center, as Ms. Polanco Garcia did with her nephew.
So Superintendent, just so I'm clear, what would be most helpful for you, School Committee Member Polanco Garcia, to hear details about? Because I know you went through the process. What would be helpful to hear from that process?
Exacto, mi pregunta es, ¿Cuál es el seguimiento que el distrito le da a las familias que llegan, inmigrantes que no saben el idioma, cuando se le asigna a la escuela? ¿Cuál es el seguimiento? ¿Qué soporte tienen? ¿Qué apoyo emocional reciben?
So the question is, what type of follow-up does the school do for those that register for the new arrivals? What type of social, emotional support do they get? What type of follow-up do they do after they come here or register?
I'm in a unique place because I am familiar with the Tobin School in particular as their former school superintendent. And I know that the school, along with the teacher that you mentioned that speaks the language, and also staff, including social worker and assistant principal, the principal, and many, many of the paras that are at the Tobin, support the language capacity of the community, which is majority Spanish speaking. Sometimes I know as a new family, they may not always, especially as such a young child, may not always be able to access those resources immediately. I have worked at the school and have seen the way in which they take under their wing new families, especially right around the beginning of October. They usually have an, for lack of a better, they call it something other than an open house. It's like a community welcoming evening. And that's where a lot of the connections tend to happen. I would say the first few weeks of school, especially just like with your nephew, the transition of new students arriving to the school in the beginning of the school year is a time to calibrate. And then really the first week of October in this particular school community is really where the connections begin to happen. And perhaps with your experience and what you've shared, what you're letting us know is that that may be too long to wait. And that's feedback that's really critical and important for us to receive. So thank you for sharing your testimony. Thank you for trusting us with your beautiful nephew. And I will make sure to also support with making additional connections, not just for this one story, but also for the stories of all of our families that join our system and require just the support that they need in order to feel much more welcome into their school community. So I appreciate you.
Both of us work in partnership together because there are also family coordinators in the building, and there's also a lot of work to make sure those family coordinators speak the same language as the majority of the students. So that's another piece. But in the classroom, we know that students will come to the Welcome Center, and then if they speak another language other than English, they are also given a test to determine their level, their English language development level. And once that is determined, they are placed into a classroom. And this is one of the parts of the process that we want to make better for our students. So even if a student is placed into a classroom where the teacher speaks the same language, another student speaks the same language, what I'm also hearing come out of this is, what is the transition that that student needs into the entire school community? And that is why our newcomer programming that we are working to expand for next year, sometimes people think of it as just for high schools and just in certain places. But a newcomer program is something that we should have in all of our schools, where students who have recently come to the country, not only are they coming to a new school, they're coming to a whole new country and a new city. Those needs need to be really differentiated and supported for in terms of the entire school community, not just the teachers or staff that speak the same language, but everyone needs to have the training that they need to fully welcome students. And in a newcomer program, they'll have the very intensive specific supports that they need until they feel more comfortable and can be integrated into the other parts of the day. And so it's a very careful look at every individual student as to how long they need that extra and additional support. And that's why it's so important as a part of fully including all of our students, especially students coming in, not just assigning them to a class.
I would also add that the principal and the family liaison are critical. If your nephew is feeling unsettled like that, which is understandable, to let them know so that at the school they can put the right resources in place for him. We all work together as a team, and I think we've been talking about, as our students come to the Welcome Center with their parents, how can we make it a more wraparound than it is currently? And for the testing, to help parents understand what that's for, why we do it, and how that leads to a placement. So this is an area that's important to have your feedback, having gone through, because I know you had a good experience coming through it, but then it's unsettling to hear him notice how many people are not speaking Spanish and not being able to communicate.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yo pienso que comparto la historia de mi sobrino, pero también porque sé que no soy única. Sé que muchas familias se sienten expresadas con esa historia y quiero que sepan qué puede hacer. Y estas son conversaciones que definitivamente tienen que seguir.
So the reason why I shared the story about my nephew is not only unique to me. Many different families identified myself with my situation. So this is a matter that has to be followed up. Many people actually believe or feel like I do, many families in my position.
Yo tengo otras preguntas, pero creo que mi tiempo pasó. Yo voy a pasar a...
I don't have another question. However, I think that my time expired, so I will give the opportunity to the other member.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Did you're welcome to. All right. Thank you, Superintendent, for your update, and thank you for sharing your story with us too. Question on NCAS data and just the accountability data overall. And I know we're going to have a more in-depth meeting, so maybe this is less of a question that has to be answered today and more of a conversation that as we think about the frame for next week. I think things that are going through my mind as I'm reading the analysis that's happening in the Globe and in the press, I think is twofold. One, there's a narrative that's being shared that the level of proficiency, particularly amongst grades 3 to 8, grew a percentage point, if that. Some schools more, some schools less, but that's like the average for the district. So I'm curious, as we dig into that data, like what's the there, how are you thinking about that? I think the second thing that's coming to mind for me is like we now have multiple years of data that show some real, should raise for all of us, like real alarm around the state of proficiency for our kids. And so I guess I'm curious, like what's the radical solution? Like what is the superintendent Skipper next step for us as a district? And it might be like continued investment in a lot of the things that we've been hearing about, or is there something sort of much bigger to come that we can start talking about? And I always appreciate these moments, and I think actually to full circle to Chair Robinson's opening today, like there's these moments to be really optimistic about where we're at, and then there's like the sober moments, and the data feels like one of those moments, right? Like we just didn't see growth in a meaningful way, or one that I think should make us proud, right? And so I guess I'm just sort of like grappling with it, and I know this was just like sort of high level to show where we were in relationship to the state. But I guess I'll throw that out there, and maybe you can just respond.
So I think, through you, Chair. So I think that clearly we'll get into more of the trend data, in the full presentation. I think what's sobering about all the results across the state, including ours, is how the kids continue to be behind. You know, I think at one point the commissioner talked about this being a 5-year, 6-year kind of issue, right? Of that's how long it's going to take. And I think the data is sort of proving to the point that it is a very slow recovery. We were pleased with math because we actually saw some really good bump there. I think a couple things on the literacy. One is we've invested in equitable literacy. And anytime as a district you make a turn in your approach in your curriculum, it takes a couple of years to get the traction. So we do think that the acceleration will start to happen this year. We also see a deep correlation, as you'll see next week, in attendance and performance. Now, this is not like shocking, right? Everybody can kind of understand if you miss 25, 30 days of school, you are not going to recover at the rate you need to. But I think it's important to see it in the data because it actually shows that there's a cutoff in the number of days where you're absent for a school, where if that is your average, it's almost impossible to break the performance levels. This is why we keep talking about being in school. It's a crisis in America, but it's even though we were one of the few one of the few large districts to show a decrease in chronic absenteeism, we need to go quicker in that metric because every day a student isn't here, they're not learning. And when you string that together, you're stringing more learning gap. So I say this because it's not going to be a simple solution that people put forward. I saw in the paper 7 bold ideas or, not taking away from any of them, right? I think everyone's trying to think out of the box. But I don't think that there's just actually one. No. This is going to take a menu. Tutoring has its place, for sure. Extending time in the form of after-school programming, weekend programming, year-round programming has its place. Using data to really drill down deeply to what each student needs and where they are. Ironically, absenteeism wasn't addressed in any of those ideas, and it's actually the number one low-hanging fruit that we should go after. Yeah. So we will be putting together kind of our menu of approach in this, but we need to be focused on acceleration. I do think that the social emotional supports we have put in place as a district are taking root. We see it in the incident data in a positive way. We see it in both at the school level, at the district level. We see it just from student report, teacher report. So we need to continue with that so our students can heal, and in healing, they can begin to recover academically.
I appreciate that. I will I'll add an 8th idea to the 7 maybe bad ideas. But one is one that I just feel like, and part of this is like a much larger issue, but it's like one that we're not talking about. We're watching every workforce grapple with how to bring people back to the office. And we did this thing with kids that I think is really painful, which it's just like you had all this freedom and then tomorrow it's over. And we watched with adults that like that just was not gonna work with industry. And we just haven't treated kids the same. And I think there is like big connections as to why we're seeing kids not showing up to school. And we allowed ourselves to have all those conversations about adults in the workforce and have not had that conversation about what we've taken away from kids after giving them such autonomy. And so it becomes like sort of business as usual, where so many other industries didn't operate that way. And for some reason, schools did. So I hope that's in some of our forward thinking. I have 2 more questions. I think they're actually pretty fast. I'm excited to hear about the updates on advanced placement. I've been asking for a bit, and I'm curious if this is in either a budget conversation that we're going to have as we move into budget season or something that's on your radar, but what is the minimum AP offering? I love like the diversity in content, but like what does it mean to have a robust AP program at a school? And what does that look like for us and for you? And do we have a goal around that? For every school, add X number of kids to have X number of programs.
Right, so through your chair, so this one, I think, does get into student choice in how they build their college muscle, college readiness muscle. For some students, that's AP, particularly in subjects that interest them. In some schools, that's dual enrollment, where you may have a professor coming in and offering the course. In some schools, that's early college. In some schools, that's IB. So I don't think that there'll be one menu fits all, but there will be this expectation of a certain number that roll up to what we think gives a good foundation for persistence.
I look forward to hearing more about that, which brings me to my last question. I'm excited to hear the enrollment updates, and I'm sure we're going to unpack more of that, and I appreciated your question too, just around the sort of shifting demographics of our system, which I imagine will also be part of our budget conversation this year. We have to plan for a different system. I have often talked about this, but we are now going into enrollment season for the next year, like on our website, right? It's like November, this is what you should do as a parent. And I am curious, and it connects back to my AP question, are we doing anything different? Is there a plan for us to do anything different to get parents the information they need to find high quality options, and what does that look like for this fall and obviously into the new year?
Right, so I think the family liaisons and in general welcoming services is doing a lot of work right now around parent information. The guide is actually like hot off the press. But we are also at the secondary level. The secondary team is doing a lot of work to work with our high schools about being able to share with parents and students what offerings they have. This is something we used to do quite well, and I think just over time, and then the pandemic derailed it. But it's at the secondary level a big issue around choice. So seeing Madison in the new admissions process, reaching back, going into the middle schools, making the kids aware and the parents aware of what CTE vocational ed is. There's a whole kind of educational campaign that will be happening around this. So the shorter answer is yes, many things. And we can include that and kind of fold that in, particularly around when we present on college career and what we're intending to do at secondary level.
Copy. Thank you.
Thank you for the report, as well as the questions that have been asked prior. Mine, I think, are relatively quick. I think I was actually looking for, did we establish a new date? I know that at the last meeting there was I guess we canceled the open house for the Green New Deal. Did we find another opportunity to do that?
So through your chair. So Chief Stanislaus, do you want to just, it's not going to be in the same format, but I know that Chief will be able to share what we're doing for engagement.
Good evening, everyone. So we decided to shift the format. As the initial open house, we were going to present sort of like the framework for the rubric. This past week, we've had the opportunity to pressure test the rubric. And what we're working on right now is actually doing sort of like regional workshops across the city to bring the community in to share feedback on the rubric.
Okay, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And also, just knowing like upcoming, 2 days is the open house for the West Roxbury Education Complex, like, correct? And so just thinking about what's the mode, or how have we been reaching out to folks for feedback, and what's our plan there?
Chief Stanislaus couldn't quickly get back to her seat there. That's one of several, right?
Yeah. My bad.
So throughout the summer, we've been holding sort of like staff walkthroughs and walkthrough with the alumni committee at the rec. This weekend, we've launched an open house for the O'Brien community. We have reached out to all of the O'Brien families via Messenger, has shared it with the school, the principal, to share with families as well, and all of the O'Brien staff to do, myself and a few other colleagues across the district and the city would be there to hold walkthroughs and answer questions for the O'Brien community. Any questions or concerns?
Not particularly. I think not for you specifically. I think always with engagement, my concern always goes back to who has power in those conversations and who has the ability to make decisions or be part of that process. So even in the sense of gathering feedback in the form of ideas, that's one form. But I think what we've heard from families and just over the years and the short time that I've been here has been who gets to make those decisions, or decisions feel like they've already been made and it's sort of just checking a box that we're here. So just making sure that we're taking the steps necessary to make sure that, you know, any time that we are doing that we're not perpetuating that power dynamic. So thank you for the update there.
Thank you. And just like one thing to share, so we've, in the community meeting that we held and also smaller group walkthroughs, et cetera, the concerns that we've heard from the community, we've compiled them in FAQs and like worked on feedback. The community has shared concerns surrounding transportation. They've shared concerns surrounding like different parcels across the city that they would like us to look into. We've worked with our public facilities department to do test fit models on those parcels and to give us updates on what's feasible on those parcels across the city, and has developed FAQs and feedback based on what have been shared so far and shared it with the community, and we'll be prepared to speak to it this weekend as well.
Sure, that makes sense. And actually, now that I have you, just a follow up just on the great news that we had, from the update from the last meeting. Just checking in, how is on-time performance for our transportation?
I will transfer that to the fearless leader of transportation, the executive director, Dan Rosengard.
All right.
I think Dell wanted that question, actually. No, thank you for the question, Dr. Elkins. So we've continued to, I think, see improvements in our on-time performance, especially comparing to prior years. We're not where we need to be yet, certainly, but we hit 90+% for 2 days in a row for the first time late last week. Those are initial numbers. And then through the first 7 days of BPS, we have final on-time performance numbers at this point. We were at, let me pull them up real quick. They disappeared from my document. We were at, I want to say, here we go. 79% for the morning and 80% for the afternoon on-time performance through the first 7 days of BPS school year. So certainly not where we need to be, but that is through that first 7-day period, the highest it's been over the past several years.
Dan, can you just explain why the process that we have to go through and why we can't share like the last 7 days? We go through like a clearing process. Can you just explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this relates to, it relates back to the work that we've done over the past year after identifying and reporting the challenges with missing GPS data. And we did last year, at the end of every month, we would do a really significant manual cleanup of all of the data to make sure we were capturing everything when we were reporting it to DESE. And then over the summer, we really kind of systematized and formalized that process so that it's now, rather than at the end of every month, it's happening on an ongoing basis. throughout the month. But at any given time, we have kind of finalized data looking back, a week plus. But in that interim period, we're still doing that cleanup. And I think the other piece here that's been really positive is through the first 7 days of BPS so far, we've been 3% or lower missing GPS data consistently, which is better than we were at any point last year as well. So I think also we feel a lot more confident in the on-time performance numbers that we're reporting.
Thank you.
Go down here.
Hi. It's my turn. I hope
ahead.
I won't
Yes.
take that long, but the question is pretty general. A member who has always attended our meeting in a very devout fashion and has also worked with us and raised a number of issues that are very of concern to me. The last one that I saw, and it's pretty grave concern. I understand that MCAS is not by no way a good measure of the students' achievement. However, even with equitable literacy and all the programs that you have implemented, the population of English learners have always been at the rear end of receiving, garnering any kind of achievement. I'd like to have some assessment from you or from your staff, for the overall picture in how to improve that, how to address the concerns regarding EL students, particularly with a look at. I know that we've been talking about that for so long, and it has never been in any way productively implemented. But even without that, the concern right now, as I said, MCAS does not stand as the single and most important measure, but still, the EL students population hasn't performed very well, in addition to the black students population as well. My focus is much more on the on those minority groups of students in relation to the kind of programs, initiatives, projects, whatever you have there in advancing, in addressing this dilemma. Thank you.
Through your chair. So it's of deep concern to us as well. I think, unfortunately, statewide, we have seen this. I think both in Access and in MCAS. And I think when we present next week, we'll definitely be shining light on this. Our trends, our third and fourth grade trends, are really mirroring the state. It's just low. I think in terms of equitable literacy, to kind of my point before, it's both the training, it's the materials, the access to the high quality materials, all of that took time to put into place. So I think this is the year that those things are in place, where our PLCs are happening with fidelity. And I think because of all of those things, we will begin to see movement. But with the pandemic, it just disrupted an implementation that had begun 2 years ago. I also think that we're seeing with our, multilingual learners that they had severe disruption in the pandemic. And so they're often coming with even less literacy in their own native language or in a language. So we're seeing a higher concentration of SLIFE students. And so all of this just requires a different set of strategy for our multilingual learners. But that will be part of the presentation for next week as we go into the data itself. it was, I think, very disheartening to see statewide that our multilingual learners, in addition to here, are not progressing and making attainment at the levels we need and want. So this will be a big focus for us. Certainly needs to be part of our inclusive learning plan, as that will come to school committee in October. And so we share that concern, and we will make sure that we're focusing with particular attention on our MLs and our MLs with disabilities.
Thank you.
Mr. Maida?
I'm good.
You don't have a question?
You can pass.
You'll pass?
Yeah.
Okay. Before I go,
No, you.
okay. I didn't know whether you had another question that you wanted to ask before.
You
I go.
thought I would have another question? I do.
I know you do.
I do. I'm just going to ask one, and it's actually about summer planning. I appreciated the update, so thank you. And congratulations on congratulations to the team, but also to all of the families who got to reap the rewards of a really well-executed summer program. This is what I'm going to ask, and I think it connects probably to my gearing up for budget conversations for the future. But as you're doing the planning for next year, are we thinking about programs in a categorically different way? And are we thinking about targets that are different than just the number of programs, but the type of outcomes we want students to yield as a result? And that may be true for some programs and not all programs, right? But I'm just sort of curious, in reflection from this summer, big news, exciting, yay, and then also future planning, where's your team at around this?
Sure. So I think when we present the full set for the summer in memo, we'll be able to include some of the impact data, which I know is been of interest to everyone. I think one of the big shifts that we've begun, this past summer, asking of our partners is to think about impact and how they're going to measure that, which was not part of the conversation, beyond attendance. I do think attendance matters. I think also what students have to say about the programs and what parents do matters, because it's really, summer becomes a choice. If it's not something that the students are bought into and they feel that they're getting something from, they don't go. So that will matter. And then, of course, each one has, of our many partners, different focus or different foci. And so I think really looking at what slice of impact are they having? Is it social, emotional? Is there academic and enrichment? Is there language development? Is there social peer development, right? The whole thing. Another thing that we had piloted was the 300 ESY. And this was a big shift for many of our partners to have the conversation for including students with disabilities at a deeper level. So because we were able to demonstrate that and get that really onto the radar, we will be expecting more of our partners next year relative to this. I think it also, we added new partners, new community partners to the fold, and I think we will continue to do that based on feedback from parents and students as to what they would like to do during the summer months.
Okay.
I'm not sure if this is the right venue to be asking this,
Okay, cool.
but I just kind of like to raise a separate issue. I was just wondering about how the excused attendances are working, because I talked to somebody in the front office, and they saw that my absence was not excused. They saw that my mom sent the email, but it still wasn't logged as excused. So and the office is usually taking a week or even longer sometimes for these absences to be excused. And that's kind of a big deal in terms of grades, like being able to submit late work, being able for all that. And so I just wanted to ask about that.
Sure. So we have in the audience our head of schools and accountability, as well as our regional soup. So I'm sure somebody can talk with the school, Diego, to find out what's happening with the attendance and why it's taking so long.
Okay, so this isn't just the regular thing?
No, you could have that conversation with me offline too, but that's all right, we got it.
Got you.
We got it, we got you.
Okay. I have, go ahead, you want?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, this is not a question regarding anything that we have discussed, and that all of that is somehow linked from your presentation. This is a general comment that I would like to direct to you. As a matter of fact, I heard your comment today, and right now in front of the forum here, I would like to make sure that everybody knows how I feel about Jerry. I address her as Jerry rather than Madam Chair. I've been with her, 5 years now? I know that you have served on this committee much longer than I do, but for the last 5 years that we've been working together, I know where your heart is. We both are retirees. And rather than enjoying you or I enjoy our retirement, traveling the world, just whatever the time left we have, you're here. And you're here a lot longer than I was. There are times that I want to resign. As a matter of fact, dealing with all these negativism, I do. But people like you, people like Michael O'Neill, keep me here. Not because of the $7,500 a year that I got. That didn't even pay for my gas from where I'm coming from to this meeting. But you guys are. So I hear you. I understand your commitment. I understand where the emotion comes from. I read something on the news, and I'm not flabbergasted. I know it's part of our job. Well, let's put it this way. Until and unless this committee is changed by the vote of the people, whatever the referendum was, until and unless we are abolished and there is an elected committee, stay. Stay. And continue on with your work. As long as you're here, I'm here. And if somebody replaced me by some elective vote, I welcome it. Come on down. Thank you.
Thank you. Two things. We talked briefly about the Barbara Henry Award, and I don't know if everybody knows who Barbara Henry is. Barbara Henry was Ruby Bridges' teacher. Barbara Henry is a Boston Public School graduate from Girls Latin School, and still lives here in this area, and is still very active and interested in education. And the award was given, this is I think the second year it's been given, the first time to somebody in Massachusetts, but it's called the Barbara Henry Courage in Education Award, given to somebody who goes above and beyond. So we're very happy that one of our teachers was able to get that award this year. The other one is more of a request. We continue to talk about the Look Act. We talk about equitable literacy. We talk about teachers who speak native language. How can we have a real sort of conversation to understand how all these things are coming together or not, to really take a deep dive look into what's happening for our ELLs. I know we can't always talk about it in the way we need to, but what does our staff at the school level in all areas look like in order to really support the students and the families that are actually in attendance in our school? My heart breaks to hear a 6-year-old feel that nobody's got his back, that here he is in a new country, in a new world, and he doesn't see enough people that can connect with him, whether they're students or adults. And I wonder how many other of our children are having a similar conversation. So again, I really feel that we need to go deeper into this. My other issue is with equitable literacy. My hope is that we will stick with it if it's working long enough to make a difference, because we can all talk about any number of different kinds of reading programs and whether there's writing also going along with the reading that keeps churning through, and kids don't seem to make the kind of, gains in reading that they can. So I hope that we can, as a district, unpack it a little bit to help us understand how all of these things relate and where we need to push differently to move it forward.
So through you, Chair. I think in the inclusive learning plan is where many of these terms will come together in what we mean. And that is scheduled for school committee, I believe, October 18th. Yeah, October 18th. And so we will make sure that we particularly offer opportunity to have dialogue about that at that meeting. I agree with you on the equitable literacy. I think you see this nationally, the conversation about literacy and everybody looking for the next best thing. I think what we've tried to do with equitable literacy is it's a framework. It is not a particular package. It is a framework, and it is reliant on teachers being trained in literacy. It's required on teachers having access to high-quality instructional materials, having the pedagogy and the materials be culturally and linguistically affirming. And so it is really a framework that catches all of that. Because of the pandemic, it was started, and then it's been a slower rollout because of the kind of the recovery efforts. But we feel very good between the professional learning communities that are happening, the regional network that work that is happening, the high-quality instructional materials that schools are now using, the training that teachers have gone to. All of these things come together, and we believe this will be the year that we start to see that traction.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
If there's no further discussion, I'll now entertain a motion to receive the superintendent's report. Is there a motion?
So move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Is there any objection to approving the motion by unanimous consent? Hearing none, the superintendent's report is approved. We'll now move on to general public comment. Ms. Sullivan?
Thank you, Chair. The public comment period is an opportunity for parents, caregivers, students, and other concerned parties to make brief presentations to the school committee on pertinent school issues. Questions on specific school matters are not answered at this time, but may be referred to the superintendent for a later response. Questions on specific policy matters are not answered at this time, but may be the subject of later discussion by the committee. This meeting will feature 2 public comment periods, with the first comment period limited to 1 hour. Priority will be given to those testifying in person. Time permitting, the committee will then open it up to virtual testimony. After 1 hour, anyone who has not testified will have the opportunity to do so at the end of the meeting. We have 10 speakers this evening. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak, and I will remind you when you have 30 seconds remaining. If your remarks are longer than 3 minutes, please email your comments for distribution to the committee. The time that an interpreter uses for English interpretation will not be deducted from a speaker's allotted time. Speakers may not reassign their time to others. Please direct your comments to the chair and refrain from addressing individual school committee members or district staff. Please state your name, affiliation, and what neighborhood you are from before you begin. We'll begin this evening with John Mudd, followed by Peggy Wiesenberg and Deb Shea.
Thank you. It's good to see everybody in person after such a long time. I'm John Mudd, longtime education advocate in Boston, resident of Cambridge. And I'm going to give some sobering interpretations of MCAS results tonight, and at least my reading of them, and I hope they're not received as toxic grandstanding. They really, I take more my inspiration from, you know, the James Baldwin quote, you know, that which I had here but can't find, my technology failure. But as you know, it says, not everything we face can be changed, but we're not going to change things unless we face them. So I'm talking about, from the perspective of a member of the ELL task force, particularly focusing on ELL learners. And from my quick reading, the data of the results for Boston, it appears that English learners were the big losers since pre-pandemic years with other subgroups. For example, English learners in grade 3 lost 15 percentage points from the pre-pandemic 2019 test results in passing the ELA MCAS points and 12 points in math, the most of any subgroup. Not only did ELs learn, but their achievement levels are disastrously and unacceptably low, at only 9% for third graders and 6% for fourth graders in English language arts. This means that BPS continues to fail to prepare about 90% or more of English learners to pass MCAS. Like all other subgroups, except for the 10th grade English language learners, none of the subgroups, whites, blacks, Asians, Latinos, English learners, students with disabilities, have regained the ground lost during the pandemic. Recovery has not happened for students in BPS as yet. Despite the overall losses from pre-pandemic years, the question is also whether the Equitable Literacy Program has shown progress and we are on track during the past couple of years. The data that I read shows that equitable literacy is not having equitable results for English learners. For grade 3 ELs, there was a continuing decline in the last year of 9 percentage points in passing rates. For fourth graders, there was in fact an increase in performance, but the increase that brings passing percentage to 6%, up from 4% in 2002. This is not acceptable, and I know you agree. In no way could you say this is equitable. In no way could you say it's acceptable. In no way could you approve continuing the same strategy. It is urgent to change. The ELL task force, was that 30 seconds or am I limited?
That's the time.
Time. Okay, the ELL task force has continued to say we need access to native language. The evidence is there. Please include that in your priorities as you assess the new programs for the next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Peggy Wiesenberg.
Good evening. I'm the parent of 3 Boston Public School graduates and a member of the board of Citizens for Public Schools, a statewide nonprofit that has been the voice of public education since 1982. We were involved in broad-based grassroots coalitions committed to public education and opposed to mass ballot initiatives seeking to divert tax dollars to parochial and privately run charter schools via voucher programs. We participate in the Coalition for Equitable Education to advocate for measures to implement the Racial Imbalance Act by promoting voluntary desegregation programs. We continue to support programs and funding for urban school districts that need services to address issues linked to poverty and high concentrations of English language learners and special needs students. We are supporters of the Thrive Act, which is having a hearing October 4th, and I hope some of you testify at that hearing at the State House at Gardner Auditorium. This is an alternative to state receivership. It would replace the failed approach to educational assessment with policies that help all students thrive and succeed. I would invite all of you to CPS's 40th anniversary years of educational justice work on October 19th at 7 p.m. via Zoom. Admission is free, but we welcome donations to support the work and our staff. Congressman Jamal Bowman will be our speaker. Representative Bowman is a former public school teacher who founded a middle school in the Bronx, Mr. Cardet Hernandez, and he was a principal for a decade. As a congressman, he has introduced 9 bills to invest in our schools and make the rich pay for their fair share. Recently, Congressman Bowman and Cory Booker introduced the federal Green New Deal for public schools bill that would invest $10 trillion over the next 10 years into our public schools. And we know our facilities here need a Green New Deal. Another of his bills would reduce the amount of federally required testing, returning required testing to grades 4, 8, and 10, and it complements our campaign, More Teaching and Less Testing, to end the relentless MCAS testing regime and replace MCAS graduation requirements with holistic assessments. Thank you, and good evening.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Deb Shea.
Hello, it's nice to see you all. My name is Deb Shea. I live in Dorchester, and I'm the parent of a 4th grade student at the P.A. Shaw School. It's nice to see you. And I'm here tonight to voice concerns and frustration with the lack of communication around the upcoming merger with the Taylor School. Before the vote to approve the merger in May, our main concern was with that the community engagement was not broad or inclusive enough or meaningful enough. And those concerns continue, but since the vote, we have had no communication whatsoever. So that leaves families in a very uncomfortable position of not knowing what the status is or even what the plan is for community meetings or opportunities to give feedback. And when I asked at the school, there was no update, so I'm here. So I just want to elevate this, that it's a real concern that in addition to an already narrow scope of communication going out, now we just are not hearing anything at all. So I'm going to keep it short and sweet. And just say that I appreciate you all and all the concerns, especially that you raise about family engagement, to keep that going and keep the pressure on, because it's so, so, so important that people understand what's happening with the school, because people are going to be really confused and upset if things are just thrown at them, and we don't want that situation to be happening. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes our in-person testimony. We'll now transition to virtual testimony. Please make sure you're signed into Zoom with the same name that you used to sign up for public comment. And please be prepared to unmute yourself and turn on your camera when it's your turn to testify. We'll begin with Danielle Morales, followed by Cheryl Buckman, Michael Heischman, and Suleika Soto. If you could please raise your hands virtually.
Hello, can everybody hear me well?
Hi, good evening.
Good evening. I'm about to start my time.
Excuse me, could you
Ladies and
please turn on your
gentlemen,
camera? I'm
sorry.
sorry. Could you please turn on your camera for us?
Oh yes, of course, of course. Just give me one moment. But just so that way I could adjust myself, I apologize. Okay, I apologize for that. Good evening, everybody. My name is Daniel Morales, and I'm a senior at Boston Latin Academy. And I'm here today to discuss the absolutist and repressive tardy policy that has been enforced at BLA. Over the past few weeks, I've witnessed these policies threaten not only our students' academic pursuits, but also work against a safe, inclusive, and nurturing learning environment. The punitive tardy policies that punish students with detention per every tardy exceeding 5, alongside parent meetings and disciplinary action, have exerted a detrimental effect on student culture and productivity. The policy imposes consequences without considering the individual circumstances of each student's complex lives. It is irrational to apply one-size-fits-all punishment for students. Some may say, well, just show up on time. However, regardless if it was 10 tardies or 20 tardies before students were punished, students being punished for showing up late to school only further discourages them from enthusiastically participating in their learning while ignoring the structural issues being faced in the real world. A punishment used to enforce a repressive rule that's imposed on students creates an authoritarian atmosphere within the school, and by focusing on punishing students rather than addressing the underlying issues, the educators supporting this have already failed us. Our students, who should be encouraged to explore and grow, now find themselves facing unnecessary barriers and impediments, and it is crucial that we acknowledge these issues and take immediate action. There is no reason nor validity behind why these policies, which have been proven to restrict the student experience, must be enforced at the extremes in which they are under the whim of Gavin Smith's poor leadership. Our students' well-being, both academically and emotionally, should always be at the forefront of our priorities, and yet the sounds of disappointment echo amongst the student body as we feel our school is going downhill. I implore the committee to intervene in this manner in any way they can by at least discussing with Mr. Smith and reviewing the current policies and their impact on the school culture. It is essential to engage with students, parents, and teachers to gather input and perspectives on these policies. And additionally, I urge the committee to consider reinstating a leadership that is supported by the school committee, as evidenced by Mr. Smith's vote of no confidence, which was only listed to him under 4 months ago. I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Cheryl Buckman.
Good evening. My name is Cheryl Buckman. I'm a member of BPS Families for COVID Safety, otherwise known as FAMCOSA. I'm also a parent to a 5th grade student at the Paul A. Dever in Dorchester. I'm a longtime resident of South Boston. My question tonight is about the Green New Deal and where do each of these schools fall? The Boston Public Schools are on average over 80 years old. A good portion of these schools need major renovations to be up to code with standards. There are roughly about 46,000 students. 85% are which are those of color. 75% are students that come from low income. There has been many decades of disinvestment, which has been linked to racial inequities and injustices, which has resulted in many of our BPS buildings to crumble or even be forced to close. If we're going to envision Boston Public going into the 21st century and way beyond, then all of those schools across our beautiful city need to be adaptable for students and those with disabilities. For example, my son's school, the playground, is flooded for several days after it rains. The classrooms are outdated and too small for students to learn and for teachers to teach. We need to make the buildings universal, comfortable, adequate for teaching and for students to learn properly. Another huge problem is a lack of proper ventilation. 3/4 of buildings do not have adequate ventilation. During the COVID pandemic, BPS purchased $2 million in air-door quality sensors. This will not fix the huge ongoing problem with our aging buildings. A lack of good ventilation is associated with many airborne illnesses, toxic chemicals, and agents that are left in the air that can trigger those with asthma, plus make it very difficult to learn in these types of conditions. Boston does face a significant challenge ahead due to the ongoing climate change and the precedent rise in sea level by the year 2070. The time is now to bring everyone to the table to ensure the next several generations have a safe and healthy way of learning. One way of doing so is reaching out to the BPS community, engaging. These need to be done now, not another 30 years down the road. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Michael Heichman.
Mike Heichman, Beja, Dorchester. I would rather send flowers. For people in power, my support or opposition is always conditional. I have been an educator and educational justice activist since 1969. I have testified at almost every regular school committee meeting since March 2020. My record demonstrates who has my back. I will never be a cheerleader for racism. 2 examples for today. Mayor Wu and Superintendent Skipper have decided to move the most diverse exam school from the heart of the African American community to white West Roxbury. 500 more seats will be added intentionally for the benefit of mostly white children. No transparency, active community disengagement, segregation, and racism. The Wu Skipper plan fits in with priority number 1, take care of white people. Where is the plan for our mostly Black and brown children? A comprehensive facility plan has been promised to the community for years. What happened to this promise? Gone, disappeared, gone, replaced by a rubric. A rubric would be developed to guide facility decisions. Will the rubric be used to evaluate the O'Brien plan? Of course not. The plan is to approve the Wu Skipper plan before the rubric is developed. This is another example of Ms. Skipper using a fake process to confuse the public so she could do whatever she wants. On August 24th, 2023, over a year ago, Ms. Skipper had received a letter from 15 high-ranking retired BPS educators of color protesting against the targeting, harassment, and firing of anti-racist Black and brown central office leaders. I will continue to testify about this because Attorney Tidwell's report was a continuation of this racist cover-up. Did Ms. Skipper target, harass, and fire anti-racist Black and brown central office leaders when she first took office? The Tidwell report did not answer this essential question. On September 21st, Councilor Mejia chaired a hearing of the Council's Education Committee. Docket number 1307, hearing to audit the City of Boston's hiring, firing, and promotion policies, practices, and procedures. The first part of the meeting was focused on the school department. Ms. Skipper attended along with some of her staff, along with other panelists. Ms. Mejia requested that the panelists avoid statistics in their testimony and focus on the truth. Every panelist except Ms. Skipper spoke truthfully. Ms. Skipper used statistics to show how well she has been doing. The meeting began shortly after 3 p.m. Councilor Mejia informed us that Ms. Skipper would only be willing to stay until 3:45.
Mr. Heichman, I'm afraid you're past your 3 minutes.
She did not offer either an apology or
Thank
reason
you.
why she was leaving so early.
Thank you, Mr. Heichman.
Her had to
I know you'll send in your written testimony and we will distribute that to the committee. Our next speaker is Suleika Soto, followed by Deirdre Manning, Ruby Reyes, and Sadie Jasmine. Please raise your hands virtually.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Good evening, Suleika Soto, Beja, South End. As a BPS parent, alumni, volunteer, and advocate, I was absolutely appalled and infuriated by Chair Robinson's comments and the superintendent's enthusiastic agreement at the most recent school committee meeting and just today. It was a strange paradox that the remarks lacked introspection and responsibility for BPS's lack of progress, while at the same time blaming the community for expecting too much. Robinson was right in noting that these issues have persisted much longer than they should have. But what was missing was an evaluation of what Robinson has accomplished during her time on the school committee. This includes consistently giving her stamp of approval to the plans proposed by Skipper and her predecessors. Madam Chair, you yourself are responsible for the many policies that have been created and implemented in a way that continues to maintain the status quo and strengthen a system of inequality and injustice for communities of color. Parents, students, and communities of color have not been coming to this committee for the last 50 years asking for your charity or expecting too much. They have come before this committee because they have the right to have a say in the decisions and policies that affect their very own lives, the lives of their families, the educators, their communities, and future generations. They come before this committee to advocate for justice, for equity, and inclusion, and to ensure that their voices are not only heard, but respected. What parents and the overall community expect is for you, Chair Robinson, and other members of this unelected school committee to hold the superintendent, central office, yourselves, and the mayor's office to a higher standard rather than making excuses for a failing district. We need an elected school committee that takes responsibility for closing inequities, that recognizes the need to create systemic change, and that actively works to dismantle those oppressive systems that create and maintain them in the first place. This committee should listen to, understand, embrace, and not censor the experiences of those families and students who have been marginalized and excluded, like in the earlier remarks. We expect for you to have our back as well in order to make the needed change to create an environment of fairness and real equity. This requires more than just checking off a box or talking at people and causing division. It means engaging in real conversations with all of the stakeholders to identify and create strategies that address the root causes of inequity together. And I just also want to remind Ms. Chair Robinson and this community that the same folks, the students, the parents, and the communities and the educators were the ones that fought to keep this district from going under state control and receivership just over a year ago. So
Ms.
I
Soto?
think that a little humbleness does come a long way. We appreciate the improvements what we have made, but
Ms.
there has
Soto?
been a lot of that's been asked over the years, and the state had to intervene in order for
Ms.
y'all to
Soto?
make those changes. So
Thank you.
shame on you.
Our next speaker is Deirdre Manning.
Good evening. I'd also like to second the shout out to Mr. Cloyd from the Henderson, who I think is an amazing educator. I'd also like to move on to my testimony, where I'd like to point out that non-BPS students, residents of the city of Boston, are sometimes treated as orphans.
Thank you.
Apologize for the quality of the video. I'd like to point out that BPS students take the MAP growth testing 3 times per year. They are familiar with the dynamic aspect of the testing that initially increases the difficulty of the questions until the student is unable to correctly answer a certain number of questions, and then the difficulty drops. This type of testing raises anxiety, and non-BPS students are placed at a disadvantage because they do not regularly take MAP testing. It's a hard knock life for non-BPS students. BPS students are allowed to take the test with their peers, with their teachers, and in their own classroom. Non-BPS students are required to take the test on a weekend with an unfamiliar test administrator at an unfamiliar location and without their peers. It's a hard knock life for non-BPS students. BPS students are allowed to take the ELA portion of the test on one day and the math portion of the test on another day. Non-BPS students are required to take the two sections back to back. It's a hard knock life for non-BPS students. BPS students have detailed information, a 38-page student profile available about their MAP test performance that allows their teachers to see strengths and weaknesses. Non-BPS students do not have access to a student profile. It's a hard knock life for non-BPS students. The inequity of the different exam testing requirements puts my daughter at a disadvantage. When my daughter took that testing in June, I notified the employee at check-in that she hadn't been feeling well. My daughter had a fever documented by a BPS nurse and was told she needed to finish the test the following weekend. I was told by 2 BPS teachers that they would not have validated the test had they known my daughter was ill. A familiar test administrator would have been someone my daughter felt comfortable approaching to let him or her know that she wasn't feeling well. When I communicated with the project manager for the exam school testing process, advising her that my daughter was ill, and asked if she would be able to go back over some of the ELA questions when she returned the following weekend, I was told that my daughter had informed the test administrator that she was feeling ill after she finished the testing and could not go back to review any of the questions. I was not surprised when I subsequently received my daughter's ELA test score, which was 19 points lower than her math score, and both scores were much lower than her previous MAP testing results from her BPS tenure. My daughter does have another opportunity to take the exam in December, but that only increases the amount of anxiety that she will be feeling, since it may be her only opportunity to do well on the exam. She's 11 years old, and I'm sure every reasonable person would agree that she's being treated unfairly, which translates into a lower chance of admission to an exam school. Earlier in this meeting, it was discussed how the backs of some... Yes, I understand. Earlier in this meeting, it was communicated that the backs of particular constituencies were being had. I ask you, who has the backs of my daughter and other non-BPS students when it comes to the inequities of the exam school policies in totality, but specifically...
Ms. Mayor, thank you. Our next speaker is Ruby Reyes.
And I'm the Executive Director of the Boston Education Justice Alliance and Dorchester resident. The city's presentation of the buildings plan was deeply flawed and echoed a consistent pattern of very little information, poor planning, and accelerated timelines, all the while claiming transparency and community engagement. This is clearly very bad. The Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's Systemic Improvement Plan for BPS clearly states that the district must, quote, by December 31st, 2023, create and implement a comprehensive long-term master facility plan incorporating the recommendation of the facilities condition assessment expected to be complete by the beginning of FY 23-24, end quote. The city's unexplainable rubric is not what DESE has put in the SIP requirements. Yet again, BPS families are receiving an inconsistent promise of trust us rather than noticeable progress. As members, you have given us impassioned speeches, asked important questions, but have done very little to point out flawed presentations or vote against the continuation of broken promises that have deeply impacted generations of students, parents, and educators. Members of the school committee, including Jerry Robinson, Michael O'Neill, and Kwok Tran, have voted and passed endless proposals for school closures and mergers. The McCormick Green Fields, in which you demanded a thorough community engagement process that didn't happen. The closure of West Roxbury Educational Complex, whose students have disappeared and the impact of that closure has never been revisited. The BCLA McCormick merger, which has failed to deliver promised building renovations. Now the O'Brien School, the most racially and neurodiverse of exam schools, is being proposed to move out of the heart of Roxbury to a majority white community that will cut off access to the tea, partnerships, and resources. The O'Brien had a historical merger with the Umana and East Boston. If you pass the proposal to move the O'Brien, it will be a broken promise to the East Boston community, who will not be able to access West Roxbury as easily as Roxbury. This school committee has already voted to close schools through merger. You have passed a budget that has placed over 610 staff under ESSER funding, which will run out this year. You did this without a plan to replace these positions. This school committee has a mandate to create accountability, at the very least, to ensure the state systemic improvement plan is carried out. The district already has a rubric that is inconsistently used, called the equity planning tool. Is this what you want BPS to be? Do you want to contribute to supporting the long history of racism in Boston by making it more racist? It's time for equitable investment, transparency, and accountability, starting with yourselves. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Sadie Jasmine.
Mute. Hi, good evening. I'm a resident of Dorchester. My name is Sadie Jasmine. I have been a bus monitor for over 23 years, since 1999. Now I find myself working more hours and getting paid less. You are not going to have monitors because they drop our pay from $27 per run, which is equivalent to an hour, to $19 an hour. And thank you for hearing me. What happened? Hello? Why am I not showing?
We can still hear you.
Oh,
Have you
okay.
finished your comments?
So that's all that I have to say. Thank you for hearing me.
Okay, thank you very much. Chair, that concludes our speakers for general public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan, and thank you to those of you who spoke this evening and shared your perspectives. Your testimony is very important to us. We have no action items this evening, so we'll move right into our reports, beginning with tentative collective bargaining agreements with the Plant Administrative Association and BASIS. I will now invite Labor Relations Director Jeremiah Hassan to please step forward with the presentation. While he's getting settled, I'd like to invite the superintendent to give opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair. So tonight, Jeremiah Hassan, who is our Director of the Office of Labor Relations, will update the committee on two pieces. One is the tentative bargaining agreement with the Plant Administrators Association. The other is a side letter between BPS and the Boston Association of School Administrators and Supervisors, which we call BASIS. As a reminder, the Plant Administrators Association represents 16 employees. Although small, they do mighty work in the district. They help to oversee the custodial services and the groundskeeping at the district's 125 schools and administrative buildings, and they manage approximately 500 custodians. The BASIS is critical in the district. Its members work across our district. Some of them serve at schools as assistant principals, as directors of instruction. Others serve centrally, regional operations leaders, assistant directors of special education, really throughout the organization. This specific side letter tonight will address a small amendment to the party's contract related to program directors for ABA service. So with that, I will turn it back to Jeremiah.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. I'm excited to be here tonight and present to you and recommend your support with our tentative agreement with the Plant Administrators Association. This agreement is consistent to many of the agreements that I've presented to you previously with our facilities units. It's actually two agreements broken down into the first 3 years. It's strictly a wages-only deal. The wage pattern is consistent with what we've seen as a 2% increase in FY21, 2.5% increase in FY22, and 2.5% increase in FY23. In addition, there is a $1,000 lump sum payment for those employees who worked during the COVID year of FY22. The second agreement, also consistent with what we've seen for our facilities units, consists of general wage increases of 2.5% in FY24, 2% in FY25, and 2% in FY26. In addition, we increased on-call pay for these employees. This increase represents the work that these individuals do on an emergency basis at all hours of the night. In addition to that, the parties agreed to increase the compensatory time limit, which currently is at 240 hours, and we've increased it to 500 hours. This increase represents the amount of time that employees can work overtime. Rather than getting paid traditional overtime wages, they are issued compensatory time. So this puts a higher limit on it, so we can get more service during critical time that's beyond the traditional working hours for these employees. And then the final amendment is consistent with our other units, where we have changed Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day and added Juneteenth. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer it. Otherwise, I'm encouraging and recommending that you vote in favor of this agreement. And I want to thank our bargaining partners. This is really a great union to work with. They're always collaborative, really go above and beyond.
Thank you. No questions? You can go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the second request that I am presenting tonight and recommended that you vote in favor of, as Superintendent Skipper mentioned, is a side letter with our basis unit. And it's really just to increase a subsection of that unit, who are the program directors for our ABA service providers. We are increasing their grade from a 9 to a 10B. This comes with a slight, with a wage increase and a slight increase in the number of working days from 208 to 211 days. So we'll get more work out of the district, and it comes with an increase in wages.
Any questions? Thank you. Committee looks forward to taking action on these requests at our next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next report is a Horace Mann Charter Amendment request for Boston Green Academy, also known as BGA. I will now invite BGA Head of School Matt Holzer and Board of Trustees Chair Alex Chu to please step forward with their presentation. While they're getting settled, I'll invite the superintendent to give opening remarks.
Wonderful, wonderful to see both of you. Tonight, Matt Holzer and Board Chair Alex Chu are going to present a charter amendment relative to a request to move from a 6 to 12 grade configuration to a 7 to 12 grade configuration for BGA. This would be a request that would take effect at the beginning of school year 24-25. It's certainly in alignment with BPS's move toward reducing the number of grade configurations across the district. I think it's been well thought out and considered now for several years, and kind of coming to fruition now. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt and Alex.
Good evening, Chair Robinson, the Boston School Committee. My name is Alex Chu. I'm the Executive Director of Reach Out and Read and the Board Chair at Boston Green Academy. I'm here tonight with Head of School Holzer, and we are requesting your approval to amend our charter to reconfigure grades served from 612 to 712. And I will pass off to our Head of School in order to give you some details.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. Good evening, Chair Robinson, Superintendent Skipper, Committee. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I'm Matt Holzer. I'm the proud Head of School at Boston Green Academy. I've had the privilege of being the Head of School now for 11 years and being with the school since its founding in 2011. For those who are unfamiliar with BGA, we are Boston's only school focused on sustainability. We prepare the next generation of leaders for sustainability in the community and world. We're very proud to have an extremely diverse population that represents the city of Boston, including one of the largest percentages of students with disabilities in a very strong inclusion setting at BGA. We are, sorry, I need to take these off. We are proud to be a winner of the United States Green Ribbon Schools Award in 2019 as a model school for sustainability. and the district also is now a co-winner of that award. Congratulations. Likewise, and thank you for the shout out earlier, we're very proud and humbled to be a finalist for the School on the Move Prize from Ed Vesters. We had our site visit today. It went very well. We're very excited. I will slow down. As we like to say at BGA, we do all of this great 21st century work in a 19th century building, which we appreciate. Please come visit us. We'd love to have you. This charter amendment would, as Mr. Chu said, move BGA from a 6 through 12, which we've been now for over a decade, to a 7 through 12 school, eliminating approximately 60 sixth grade seats and instituting an additional 30 7th grade and an additional 30 8th grade seats, which would align our school all the way 7 through 12 with about 90 to 95 seats, which is ideal. It would reduce transitions for families. It would align us with the BPS and school committee policy. It would simplify our school and bring great joy to our middle school staff who are currently split between grade levels. We are excited to finally bring this before you. We are pleased to share that this amendment has already been approved by the Boston Green Academy Board of Trustees, as well as the Boston Teachers Union. We're very grateful for their continued partnership and support. We respectfully ask for your approval and continue to appreciate the support of the school committee and the Boston Public Schools.
Thank you. Now I'll open it up to members for questions. Can you give us a little background about why you were originally a 6 to 12 school?
Absolutely. In our original proposal to BPS, which is now, I think, originally going back to 2008, originally in that discussion, we wanted to work with students and families for as long as possible. It was a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of beyond the exam schools. There weren't that many 6 to 12s at the time, but we knew that 9th grade was too late in many respects and that we wanted to catch students as early as possible. We also really relished the opportunity to build programming and relationships that lasted over time. And so we started out as a 9 through 12 school in South Boston, and then when we moved to Brighton, the district allowed us to expand into 6th grade and then beyond, and that's just been a wonderful thing for our community.
So if you're moving to 7, 8, where will you, well, two things. Where will your the kids who would have come to you in 6th grade, what will their alternative option be? And where will you gain more 7th and 8th graders? What other schools may be impacted by your transition, your changes?
Absolutely. So BGA is a citywide lottery school, and so we draw from the entire city. Over 50% of our students come all the way from Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan to Brighton, which we deeply appreciate. By not admitting a new 6th grade class, we will essentially be following the pattern of the district. The expansion of K-5s into K-6s is shrinking the pool of students who are transitioning at that period, and so we think it is better for families. We think it works for our school. By expanding our 7th and 8th grade to align with our 9th grade, we feel that we'll tap the very long wait list of students who are now waiting to get into 7th grade at BGA, which is citywide.
Wonderful.
Chair, we've seen a pattern for those schools that have the vestige of 6th grade. Tech Boston's another, where it's such a very small pool of students that it's very hard to operationalize the programming. So that's why this makes complete sense for BGA and to concentrate in that and build out a robust 7th and 8th grade.
Wonderful. Thank you all. The committee looks forward to taking action on this request at our next meeting.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
We'll now move on to our final report, an update from the Boston Special Education Parent Advisory Council, also known as SPEDPAC. I will now invite SPEDPAC Chair Jack Sinnott and Vice Chair Kelsey Brendel to step forward with their presentation. First, I will invite the superintendent to share introductory remarks.
Thank you, Chair. So, welcome to Chair Sinnott and to Vice Chair Brendel, who will give an overview of their work and the 23-24 strategic initiatives. Just as a reminder, it's a requirement for SPEDPAC to provide an update to school committee every year, but tonight is more than just about that requirement. It's really about the important work they do in partnership with the district. I want to recognize SPEDPAC's tireless advocacy on behalf of the district's students and families. You empower BPS students, staff, students, parents, and caregivers through support and education. And you provide a valuable sounding board for myself, Dr. Chen, for members of our team on issues related to special education. So thank you. I would also like to thank SPEDPAC for their support with the development of the BPS Family Guide for students with disabilities in BPS. This is a new interactive resource to help families understand the special education process here at BPS. It can be found online at our website, bostonpublicsschools.org/lowercase OSS family. We're working to finalize the district's inclusive education plan, which will provide a roadmap for implementation. The plan focuses on several key areas that address both day-to-day work that we have to do to shift and the larger systems that are needed to support the work and hold us accountable. We're currently working to launch inclusive planning teams this fall at every school as part of the district-wide implementation. Following tonight's presentation by SPEDPAC, you'll have an opportunity to hear from our new Chief of Specialized Services, Kay Seal, who I couldn't be more thrilled to have joining us. She's coming back to BPS from Worcester, and she brings such a wealth of experience and knowledge and care for our families and students with disabilities and knowledge to really move the work forward. So we'll submit the inclusive education plan to DESE at the end of this week. We will be presenting formally to school committee at the October 18th, and I will now turn it over to Chair and Vice Chair.
Thank you very much. My name is Jack Sinnott. I am Chair of SPEDPAC. So thank you, Chairman and Superintendent and all the committee members. And with me this evening is...
Thank you. I'm Kelsey Brendel, Vice Chair this year of SPEDPAC. Thanks so much for having us.
Before we got started on our presentation, we wanted to take a moment to recognize the work of the prior board. It's a little awkward for us to talk about it because our names are on here, but we're not talking about ourselves. In particular, we wanted to thank Roxy Harvey, who is the outgoing chair of SPEDPAC. She led our organizations through 5 years, 3 superintendents, and 1 pandemic. And that's a heck of a lot for any group of people to bite off. That's a lot of work. But I think that she led us with style and grace and with integrity. And so I thank her for that. So tonight, what are we doing? We're making our report as required, but we wanted to introduce our board very briefly and then talk about who we are, what our mission is, what our goals are, and then our 4 strategic initiatives. We'll go over those a little bit more in depth, but I promise we will not read the slides. You're welcome. So who are we? SPEDPAC is really just a group of parents. That's all we are. We're not doctors, we're not educators, we're not attorneys. We're just people who one day discovered that we had some kids with some pretty special needs, and that we had a lot of work ahead of us. And we, of course, reached out to find out what's going to happen to our kids and what do we need to do, and school is the very first thing they hit. And so we came up against what one education advocate described to me as the Titanic. And not in the sense it was going down, but in the sense that it's this huge, huge thing that's going to be impossible for any one person to get a grip on. The reality of SPEDPAC is that we represent 12,000 something families or more of parents who are in our position. It's a lot of responsibility that we have, and it means that this work is really endless. But that's what we've signed up for, and that's what we do. I should also point out that we are an elected board, that the parents of Boston participate in our monthly meetings, and in every May are welcome to run for our board and to elect their representatives on SPEDPAC. So it's not just me, it's not just Kelsey, it's an entire board behind us and then an entire 12,000 strong community.
We, Jack's told you a little bit about who we are, but what do we do and why does it really matter is at the heart of what's next, and what really guides us, which is, as all of us know, sort of the root of mission. And what Jack said is really, really important. The families who are not here in this room tonight guide our work, and they should. It's never lost on us, any of our board members. It is a huge privilege for us to be here this evening. Everyone in this room has a huge privilege to be here this evening, and we are constantly reminding ourselves and charged with the responsibility of remembering who is not here, who can't be, and particularly with the lens of special education, which is what we accidentally came into being experts about, is really also remembering the reasons some people can't be in the room, because sometimes that's actually at the heart of the matter. You know, there are so many families who are at this moment, perhaps even wanting to watch this meeting and caregiving for a child, or occupied by trying to find caregivers for their child. But it matters, because when we talk about what our mission really is and how we want to amplify families' voices and allow them to have a seat at the table, as we're always talking about, remembering who can't show up when they would most want to is really, really important. So you see on our slide, which Jack correctly says we are not married to, we're not really slide folks, but we really, in terms of monitoring compliance with federal and state special education laws, what that really means and means to our families is that we're shining a light, an important light, a flashlight on every corner of the room. You know, the corners that are dark and need our profound attention, and also the corners where we've seen some successes, things that can be, again, amplified, repeated, and it's important to note what those successes are, to recognize progress where we see it. To advocate for all Boston Public School students with disabilities, teaching them to talk and not whisper. And I say that with the ultimate irony being that so many of our families and their students, my own son included, literally cannot speak. Yeah. Another important thing to remember when we're talking about amplifying voices, the thing I've learned the most about from my own little boy is how much he says by saying nothing. And I want us to remember who that group really is. Educating the community sounds obvious, but this really means, you know, we're committed to being a source of information that our families trust. They can come to us, they can call us, they can write us, they can text us, they can find us on the street. We hope they will. But we are available to them and accountable to them first. And of course, present concerns about special education programming to district officials. And this is, again, really about encouraging families to be the voice in the room that reaches the far back corner, and even being willing and able and encouraged to say the difficult things, the things that are not going to be met with applause or gratitude, but that must be said. And it takes a very special kind of parent. Luckily, our special ed parents are born of that strength, and we need to further promote their ability to say what they have to say and say it louder. Lastly and quickly, in terms of mission, you know, obviously promoting communication, collaboration, and cooperation between families and BPS. Again, sounds obvious, but this is what this really means at the core, is fostering all those relationships and engaging and asking BPS to constantly revisit how they invite families to this discussion. What are the barriers? How can we constantly, freshly look at it? And ensuring that those communications and processes are responsive to everyone, culturally, having translation and interpretation available. But really, the bottom line is we are allowing people to talk, to write, to leverage their voice in a way that is truly accessible and encourage being brave and saying uncomfortable things. So that said, Jack is going to outline those strategic initiatives.
So we as a board, we met over the course of the entire summer. We started meeting actually before the prior school year ended in early May, because we really wanted to get a jump on things. And knowing that the board was in transition, everybody takes the summer off because we need a break. But we recognized that this particular summer was going to be critical if we wanted to make sure that the work of SPEDPAC continued into the next year. So since May, we've been working on what are strategic initiatives. Thank you. Our first one is compliance, right? Compliance is a big word, and it seems totally obvious, right? SPEDPAC is first and foremost laser focused on compliance with Americans with Disability and Individuals with Disability Education Act. Those two federal laws are the guiding light for everything we do. If it's not related to ADA or IDEA, we are going to respectfully say there's other people who are probably a heck of a lot more expert at those topics, and we're going to let them go. But when it comes to this stuff, this is our wheelhouse, and this is where it's important. Ultimately, compliance is one of those things where it's a matter of understanding the law, but also understanding that within an IEP, within an individual education plan, or a Section 504, which are effectively the contracts that the schools sign between a family and the schools that are enforceable in court, for these are the services and the accommodations that are provided for families. Making sure that all parties are in compliance with that contract, it's really non-trivial. And a big piece of that for us is understanding, how do we find out about compliance? Like, I mean, when we're talking about stuff, we get calls from families, and they're like, well, I don't know if my child's plan is being met at school, or I've got an IEP, and it says something like, my child will respond appropriately 80% of the time. Well, they show me an ABLE, which is an ABA behavioral log of discrete trials. I don't know what this means. And does this even apply to the IEP?
We find ourselves speaking with families, you know, just organically all the time, where they actually frame what this is about better than we could, and we feel like we're pretty well versed. But we've had families say, you know, this is really compliance at its most boiled down point, which is, again, we need to speak to the families who may not know every single word on this slide deck, and that's something we're also really committed to. But one of the families talking about compliance recently was saying, you know, what this is really teasing out is like, when you open a new board game, you need the directions to play the game. Yeah. So even if you've read them and you understand your next move, where your piece is on the board relative to everyone else's, you also have to know if they screwed up and didn't put the instruction manual in the game, who do you call to say something's missing about my game? Yeah. And it was just a really, I think, eloquent way to map out some of these complex words that, again, we're trying to get very far away from.
Yeah, the problem with laws, I mean, these laws are phenomenal for recognizing the rights and the obligations that we as society, the rights that children have, and the obligations that we as society have to provide for those rights. The problem is they're laws, and we're not all lawyers. And I don't know if you've gone through and tried to read MGL. No offense to the legislators and the lawyers, but oh my, I just start glazing over pretty quickly. How can we expect parents, people new to the country, people who don't have a legal background, who don't have a sophisticated education, to, like, they're going to look at the Federal Register and read through these laws and know what their rights are? No. We can do a lot to talk to them, and we'll talk about that in a later slide. But there are some ways for us to monitor, and we need your help, okay? A lot of it is, you know, monitoring, are you guys firing on the systemic improvement plan, okay? And are you hitting your reported milestones? We'd love to be in a conversation with you about that, so that we understand what's coming up and how you're doing. And if we get advance notice, great, but we can hopefully work with you to help meet those milestones. The other one are monitoring things like the DESE rulings in problem resolution system. These are the complaints that parents log to say there's something wrong, there's something either specific with my kid or systemic in the system, well said. And these rulings are integral to how parents understand whether or not their school is in compliance with their IEP or 504. We'd also love to be able to work with you to monitor OCR complaints, Office of Civil Rights. There's an important one, you'll notice the very bottom one, I promise not to read, but expand 504 compliance to adhere with IEP compliance standards. This This is a very fine-grained problem, but there is a legal distinction between having an IEP and a 504. And some of the compliance issues are stricter around IEPs than they are in 504s. There's a lot of reasons for that. It doesn't have to be that way. I understand that, we need to abide by the law and we need to recognize that the law has certain reporting requirements, but we would ask that you consider treating all 504 students as if they had an IEP and understand that compliance issues really should be across the board. I was very heartened to hear talk about your nephew, member, that the staff at the Tobin reach out and say, we're going to figure out what's best for your kid. We're going to help them accommodate, or we're going to provide some accommodations. There's a special needs word for you. We're going to work with him to make sure that he finds a place and a home here, right? I'm willing to bet your nephew doesn't have an IEP. He doesn't have a 504. Yet the Tobin is acting as if that were true. I started substituting because I made the mistake with the prior superintendent of telling her I wasn't busy during the day and there were 800 staff. And so I'm substituting at a school and I absolutely love it. I didn't know. I started working with special needs kids in the mid-'70s. I know I don't look that old, but I didn't know that actually I was good at this and I could find a rapport with these kids, but I have. And I'll tell you that there's one child in particular who is profoundly disabled. She's a lovely, lovely girl. And for various reasons, her family has never signed an IEP, has never agreed to it, won't even go to IEP meetings. The teachers in the school act as though the IEP is in force. That even though they don't have technically a contractual obligation to comply with that IEP, they're acting as if it does. And I would love to be able to say to every parent in Boston, this is how BPS Act works, okay? If you've got a problem with the IEP, say it, reject it, do what you need to do. But trust and understand that BPS is doing the best that it can to ensure that IEPs or 504s are meeting the absolute maximum in compliance. And if we can't say that, then perhaps we should have a conversation. So, inclusion, thank you. There's a saying in the special need community, FAPE first, setting second. Free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment or setting. Inclusion, when I first spoke to this committee years ago during Tom Pezant's administration, it was about surprise transportation. The second time I talked, it was about this new thing that I heard about inclusion and how come we're not doing that and we should do it. That's really cool. I understand there's some in the school. Why isn't it everywhere? Well, be careful what you ask for because you might just get it. We're now getting it. And it's like a tidal wave. And there's so many different facets to inclusion. When we talk about the inclusion plan, we just got a presentation and it was phenomenal. We've got pages of feedback because there's just so much stuff and I don't know how our parents are going to be able to digest this. But let me bring it down to where we live, right? For us, in the context I was talking about 20 years ago, inclusion is very, very specific. It means FAPE and LRE. And if FAPE and LRE in a special needs context is not front and center and that there's a primary lens on it, then for us, we're going, okay, so what does that mean? There are a lot of problems in our society. There's a lot of problems in our schools. There's a lot of problems in our culture. And if we can address those in an educational context, do it. But at the same time, you need to understand from a special needs perspective, we're sitting there going, okay, well, we've got a lot of complicated stuff going on. What's the fan out from all these other considerations? And how do we make sure that where one hand giveth, the other hand doesn't taketh away? That's a major concern for us. The other issue for us is when it comes to inclusion, in a very real sense, you're really talking about placement. Inclusion is where education happens. It's not necessarily the education itself. People talk about models, right? There's the Mary Lyons model, and there's the Henderson model, and Allison Doherty's old symphonized model at Westy. These are great models, but they're about where the instruction happens, right? They're not about saying, how do we craft accommodations for these kids and find teachers who understand, who have pedagogies specific to those particular accommodations, right? My oldest son is autistic, and he's got some behavioral comorbidities that are pretty serious, right? His accommodations are very different from Kelsey's son's because he's a medically fragile child. They're very, very different. You cannot take a special ed certified teacher who's trained and has experience working in an autistic classroom and working with PEX boards and token boards and operant conditioning techniques and expect them to walk into a medically fragile class and be effective at all or have any clue what they're doing. So for us, when you start talking about inclusion, you're also talking about staffing. And it's not just finding seats and filling them with teachers, but finding with the right teachers. And I'm going to tell you, you're going to have some negotiations to do when union contract time comes up because we need to be sensitive to the fact that every teacher is not a widget. You can't just take one teacher and plug them in to a position, and that is especially true in a special needs context. It's vital. I think that conversation needs to happen across the board and with a lot of stakeholders to understand what the implications of that going forward are. Yeah, you want to talk about
No,
that
go
one?
ahead. No,
No,
you go
we're
ahead.
No, I'm going to let you go because
No, I'm just going to highlight again, it's my favorite sort of, I suppose, word on this particular topic, which is to remember something again that sounds quite simple, but when we use this word, which is the new hot word in BPS, everybody tries to incorporate it as often as they can in most of what we say, which is good. But when you hear a family again trying to profess that they know as much as everyone in BPS about their child, what the language means, and there's a lot of posturing that we've ended up learning we have to do it to sort of sound like we're in the game. And we did have a couple families say, well, wait, so is there such a thing as an exclusion classroom? And it's just, I say that not to mock at all, what we're talking about here, but it is a really interesting sort of concept to tease out because it speaks to who belongs where, who's including whom.
Yeah.
So we always sort of refer to that about thinking, to Jack's point, about whether we're talking about place or program. You could have an inclusive program on a lawn if you had all the things that you needed to do it. So that said.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to point out was the Council of Great City Schools for years has been raising alarms about how much sub-separate education, the role that it plays in BPS. I'm going to tell you, you're always going to have sub-separate. You're always going to need sub-separate. Sub-separate will always be appropriate. And remember, in any plan that comes through that would propose that we begin closing down sub-separate, it's in the IEP. It's not going to happen unless the parents agree to take their children out of sub-separate and put them into inclusion. So when you're planning all this stuff from a facilities standpoint, from a placement standpoint, remember, you're still going to have a heck of a lot of sub-separate.
And families that are actually quite comfortable and yearning for it, which is
exactly.
so really important to remember.
Exactly, which brings us to another piece. Oh my God, I'm talking and talking. One of the great, I love this bit in the transition planning, the inclusion plan, talking about there's no metric, there's no set of rubrics around how do you know when a kid is ready to transition from a sub-separate to an inclusion class. Go talk to Allison Doherty. Look at the Symphonized program that was at Westy. That was a model for exactly how that transition can happen. It can happen in a very, very academically rigorous and inclusive manner. But where they're working with kids at that point in the high school level, there's no reason we can't globalize this and push it down for how do we transition kids. I'm super glad that they brought up that point, and you actually have an existing model and an expert in it here in BPS. What's the next one? Am I on?
No.
No, you are. Oh, good. They're tired.
This particular initiative about member support and engagement, again, to me, is really the heart and soul of what, belongs, again, to all of us, or should. Our members, our families, we think of them as belonging to us, and they really need to belong and feel that they do at BPS. During COVID, many of our special ed families used to say, if anyone wants to know how to organize, plans around isolation or staying at home rules, all you had to really do was ask a special ed family, because we've been pretty isolated for years. We know how to do it really, really well. We're very, very practiced. So I volunteer. Many of our SPED Pack members, we will volunteer and step up to the next if we ever have to go through that again. We know how to do that, and I say that again not to be flip, but what this initiative really speaks to is to providing opportunity, and that doesn't just mean throwing things on a calendar to allow parents to have their voices heard, but having them understand that for every one parent who finally makes it to a meeting, can attend one of these forums or a feedback session, like we had the other day, the understanding that there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds more at home who have the same question, the same thing that keeps them up at night, the same thing that they, and understanding that means it's all the more critical to make sure that the one person who can show up is celebrated and encouraged to return over and over again. Empowering these families to pursue for their own students what they didn't know it was possible. And what that really means is, it sounds basic, but parents don't know how to pursue something, literally in terms of even starting an IEP process, for example. They don't know what they don't know. And the piece about being sure there are places and tables and literally places to commune and allow a family to ask a question as supported by BPS that isn't filled with acronyms and really boils down to the meat of the matter. What do you need to do? 1, 2, 3, and if that goes south, here's what you're gonna do next. We are trying to encourage those kind of platforms fast and furiously. And we speak also to identifying, obviously, and elevating systemic challenges in BPS. What has been interesting for us to watch is also, again, when we speak, we've had a shift in our own sort of set of priorities that really have some active and purposeful language around talking about our families as constituents, because it's really, again, about owing them a service that we are also trying to partner with BPS to provide. And it speaks very much to that collaborative partnership where it is, I've forgotten who said it in the beginning, the amount of work there is to be done is so vast and so huge, we would be selfish not to look around the room at all times and figure out who's the best person in this room in this moment to help me with this for this family, and then realize that, again, to solve something for one family, our constituents, let's say, we've just made a firm commitment to call every family back, give ourselves time constraints that we really hope BPS will also learn from. When we say we will get back to a family in 10 days, we are getting back to them in 10 days. May not be with the solution or the answer, but we're hoping those kind of commitments to families, when they hear and see that play out from BPS as well, really, really, speaks to a level of trust that we want to get back to.
Yeah, well, this is the retail politics for us. This is where parents and their concerns directly impact our work, and where we can help them make change in the schools. I mean, this speaks to really the core of our work.
It does. And we are excited for the partnership around it. So, of course, we would be remiss if we didn't throw out we really hope any families will come to our monthly meeting, which conveniently is tomorrow night, our first one out of the year. So again, with regard to engagement, it's really about getting rid of some of the language and saying the meat and potatoes of engagement. Engagement means committing to somebody else and making a long-lasting commitment to keeping a conversation alive, no matter how difficult it is. So we are thrilled about that. And lastly, again, a family can't fight for what their child deserves if they don't know what the landscape of offerings is. And
that's where transparency comes in. So the biggest ask, besides buses that run on time, sorry, Dan, is that what are the programs? What strands are out there? What can I, how can I ask for something if I don't know what's out there for me to ask for? Traditionally, BPS has really held their cards close to the hand, right? That you don't want to tell people, which I understand. You don't want to make commitments that you can't fulfill, and you don't want to get people's hopes up when there's no seats available in a particular place or location that the parents would really like. What we're asking you to do is be transparent. Let parents know this is the strand, this is what's at the school. Don't worry about how many seats, because you'll get a much better sense of really where parents want to get their kids situated and where they think the best placement for them is. And you can't really make any kind of logical or sensible placement decision if people aren't working with 100% of the knowledge. It just doesn't make any sense. I will say that for us, transparency flips back to compliance, because a lot of this is just being open and above board with each other. I will say that our attitude as a board is that we want to find consensus. I know sometimes that's not always true in the community, but I have found, and our board agrees, at least until I prove myself wrong, that we get more done by finding where we agree, finding where's the commonality. And sometimes with luck, the differences will come out in the wash. We'll figure out a way around them. But first we need to figure out how do I listen to you as a school, as a union, as a city, and as a group of parents of special needs kids. How do I listen to understand where you live and what problems you face and how I can help you solve those problems, so that hopefully you will turn around and listen to me and listen to our community and say, okay, what are your problems and what do we need to do to go above and beyond to help you solve them? And I think really that's the essence of transparency, because it's sitting down at the table together and laying our cards out, even in something as simple as, these are the programs we offer, this is where they are. Let's figure out how to make that happen for you. So, while we have you, we have a couple of asks. So, DESE PRS, the problem resolution system, this is a really cool system, right? There's a lot of stuff in there. Y'all have milestones. You have to make responses. If it's a special needs issue, can we create a subcommittee or something? Can we get on a mailing list? Could you CC us, whatever your responses are, so that instead of us going out to DESE and fishing and stuff, that we can be proactive with parents? The next one is, again, disabilities 504. Right now, your demographic analysis only includes kids with IEPs. It does not include 504s. There's various reasons for that, how 504s and IEPs are managed at the state level in different cabinet offices, and that's mirrored in the federal system, but it doesn't have to be that way. So I know you got the data out there. Roll it up for us if you can. Let's really, this is where the 504 is an IEP. This is where the rubber hits the road. The other one is, again, to get back to the inclusion thing, that inclusion is about setting and inclusion is about FAPE. And please, 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 when people start throwing around a generalized term like inclusion, be specific. Ask them in particular, what aspect of inclusion are you talking about? Specificity is the heart of writing. It's also the heart of understanding what's going on in the world around us. Be specific. Ask them to be specific. Publish to school. You get the online is thank you. I don't even know how to say anything other than thank you. That is a huge step forward. Keep going. There's more stuff in there. It could be its own Wikipedia, but parents need it. I don't know how we're going to navigate it all, but we will figure a way, and it is absolutely invaluable, so thank you. And the last one is, visit, come, what, we have these meetings, come, what, chop liver, come.
And tell everyone you know.
Yeah.
But the school guide, truly, there are also many in this room who've actually done an enormous, enormous amount of work, pulling together data, resources, refining it, drafting it. I know, I'm trying to see where she is. Joshie, right back there. She has done.
We'll hit you for more.
She has done just, and has been insatiably curious about our work, and I would just, I guess, stop with that. I think the curiosity feature that we have in each other, us wanting to know more and hoping that you want to know more from us is really guiding a lot of our work. This special education programming available at every BPS school is, again, complement to that family guide, but I would be remiss if I didn't just say one more time, families, sort of like going into a restaurant, right? They can't begin to order off a menu or think if they even want to sit at the table if they don't know what's there. They don't. So having those published options, even to be able to think, I hate spinach. I'm never coming here again. Fine.
Spinach.
Hush. So the point is that's a really, really critical piece, I think, of detailing the programming. But a huge shout out there. And as Jack said, in all seriousness, we are thriving and excited so much this year with our new membership. So please tell people to come.
Yeah, I'll say, in final, we've come a long way. When we started, myself and some other people restarted SpedPAC, which was utterly moribund back in the mid-2000s. Special education was operating under a federally mandated consent decree. That's how bad it was. It was an absolute shambles. And it didn't have to be that way. I'm very happy to say it is not that way today. Do we have problems? Yes. Do we have a lot of work to do? Yes. But we need to recognize we have come in partnership a tremendous distance, and we really thank you for the support that you've shown over the years. It means a lot. And say hi to Michael for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, thank you so much for your update, and thank you to the entire SpedPAC for the countless hours you spend to dedicate to your families. Before we open it to members for questions, I'd like to introduce Chief of Specialized Services, Kay Seal, and ask her to join us.
Yes.
Ms. Seal. Ms. Seal recently joined BPS from Worcester Public Schools. A former BPS student and educator, she brings a wealth of experience and expertise to her new role. As the Chief of Specialized Services, she will work with BPS staff, families, students, and communities to ensure all students have equal access to the support and services they need to achieve academic success. Since she works closely with SpedPAC, I wanted to invite her to share a few words about the work the district is doing.
Thank you so much, and good evening. Good evening, school committee members, school committee chair, as well as our superintendent, families, colleagues, and also community collaborators. But most importantly, thank you for sharing your voice tonight. It's important for us to hear your message, and it's well received. We've met earlier this month, and we've had the opportunity to talk about some of your initiatives and also to look at what we need to do to build capacity and to also work on our transparency and communication. So I'd like to say that I am committed to do that work with you, for not just with the offices, but also with our communities and also with our families throughout the district. It's an honor and a privilege for me to join such a dedicated team of leaders and educators. I also would like to extend my appreciation to our families and to our caregivers for entrusting me with their children. I now have 11,000 students that are now considered mine. I tell my staff that when we're making decisions, we need to make decisions as if they're our children. And if we do that, then we'll be making the best decision. I also would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'd also like to share a little personal note about myself. This is really surreal, and I'd also like to add before I talk about myself, if there are any children or students that are listening tonight, you need to continue to dream big. You need to have hope and aspirations that you can accomplish and achieve what is in your heart to desire. Because we as educators, that is our commitment to you. So don't give up, and don't allow anyone to tell you that you cannot do what it is that you want to do. Because I feel that I'm a testimony of that. I know that our school committee chairperson, Jerry Robinson, shared with you this evening that I am also coming back to Boston Public Schools, not just in education, but also as a student. I'd like to say that coming to the United States, because I was born in Barbados, I never knew where I belonged, but my first point of entry was in Boston. And living in Boston throughout those years, I've been touched by so many dedicated teachers and educators that has made me the person that I am today, and for that I say thank you. The schools that I attended, I think back, was the David A. Ellis, was the Roosevelt. It was also Boston Technical High School, because back then I wanted to be a civil engineer. Be flexible with what you wish for. Yeah. Yeah. I love science. I lived in Roxbury. I also was impacted by desegregation. I was only 6, because everyone thinks that desegregation is a very long time ago, but desegregation in Boston Public Schools was a real impact for our children of color and for our families as well. I understand what it means to be a student, an educator, and a leader in Boston Public Schools with various positions that I've held. As an ETF in terms of a COAST, what we refer to now, I was a compliance advisor also at Court Street. I was also department head at South Boston High, and I also worked with Al Holland at Madison Park as a regional school advisor. I felt that it was important for me to not just talk the walk, but to walk the talk and to do the work. So in order for me to do that, I felt that I needed to be close to the kids, close to the teachers, and close to the people who are doing the work within our schools to really make a difference for our children. I can assure you that although I'm back, I am committed to serve our students, our families, and our community, because my primary motion in terms of being here and passion is that of service. It's all about our kids, it's not about the adults. I'm also a proud mother of 3 children. My daughter said, "You're not gonna say this," because I said it when I was accepted the position in Worcester. But 2 of my 3 children have a disability. My daughter has a specific learning disability in reading and written language. My son has a disability in ADHD. So I know firsthand what it means to be a voice for our children and understand, as parents, your desire, as well as your expectations of wanting the very best for your child. Tomorrow will mark my first month here in BPS, and I'm in awe while visiting schools, seeing our students engaged in learning, the energy and the positive affirmation of our teaching staff as well as our leaders. Throughout the various meetings and events that I've attended and given the high expectations of our superintendent, Mary Skipper, the Office of Specialized Services has begun to craft priorities, keeping students and families at the core of all that we do to promote equity and excellence for our students. So tonight I'm going to share with you some of our priorities as my point of entry into this district, and keep in mind that they're very fluid, because my priorities need to be aligned to your goals, the superintendent's goals, and what's needed best for our children. The first priority I wanted to share with you is the fact that as you talked about special education in terms of looking at it as a program or a place, it's all about the services. It's not a location, it's not location specific. It's about the services that we provide to our students who have been identified as having a disability. And my first priority right now, just as I listen to the needs of our staff, listen to our regional superintendents, as well as our leaders within our schools, and some of our teaching staff, as well as some of the staff in OSSS, that's Office of Specialized Services, I must say, I've never heard so many acronyms as I came to public schools. I'm sitting next to, and I want to thank Dr. Chen, because I make sure I position myself right next to her so I can ask her for clarification. What is ORT? What is CIA? It's an elephant by itself. So thank you, Dr. Chen. So when we look at our inclusive plan, our educational plan, and strategy. We will work as a multidisciplinary team with a sense of intentionality to drive equity for all of our learners by increasing access to grade level learning and evidence-based instructional practices. And we hope to really expand that and really work in partnership with our families, but also with our community, as well as our teaching staff and our leaders, to really look at building a fluid and effective and efficient inclusive plan throughout the district and within our schools. Another priority that we're focusing on is looking at what we're doing in terms of to collaborate and align our priorities to work in partnership with our SPED PAC. And I did take a look at some of your requests in terms of what we will do. And I want to assure you that we will work on that together and through our meetings when we meet, and with Yashi, of course, to really address some of the priorities that you did lay before us tonight. And it's so important that we continue that work to address those initiatives that you've outlined in terms of compliance, inclusion, support, and engagement, as well as we will work through that through a lens of transparency. The Office of Specialized Services will also promote and foster a welcoming partnership with our families to promote culture of embracing the diversity and learning differences of our students with disabilities, but also our students with 504 plans. And I was thinking in terms of some of your asks receiving in regards to some of that data, that is something that we're working on as well.
Thank you.
That will also include looking at working closely with our OM department, Office of Multilingual, as well as our L Task Force, as we look at the disproportionality of our multilingual learners with disabilities. Thank you, Jack, for mentioning FAPE and LRE. I did not want to say that tonight, but thank you. But keep in mind that is so important because it's not only is it a federal and state mandate for us as an educators, but it's also a moral obligation for us to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to meet the needs of these students, of all of our students, because there's a range of disabilities that these students require access and learning in different pathways.
Yep.
I say to someone, you need glasses to read, take them off. Are you able to read? And that's the lens that we need to look at for some of our students because all of their needs are so individualized and unique. So that is also something that we will focus on in terms of understanding to our parents and making sure that our parents, in terms of the goals, our parents need to be partners with us and they need to understand all aspects of the IEP. It's individualized, but they need to understand the words that we're using and how we're using those words to develop a roadmap for their child. Our students with disabilities, as well as for our 504 students plans, which ensures access. It is through these mandated processes that we will continue to promote parents and student voice to embrace their vision, to shift our focus on the success of the whole child. And that is so important for our students with disabilities, as well as for our students who have 504 plans. We'll also collaborate to provide guidance and trainings to schools to prepare BPS because DESE has rolled out a new IEP, which will be launching in school year 24. And this must address what we need to do to build capacity within our schools and our staff in the areas of eligibility, evaluation practices, as well as service delivery options through ongoing data analysis, as well as we look at aligning our goals and objectives to grade level content standards. We need to raise the bar for our students with disabilities. We need to understand that if I am a third grader with a disability, but I'm reading at a first grade level, I need access to third grade level content. It's what you do to prepare me with that access in terms of the methodology, the strategies that you're using in order for me to understand and learn with my grade level peers. So that is a huge process for us to really consider as one of our priorities, as well as making sure that our special education staff, and I'm not just saying teachers, our staff, are using evidence-based practices in their methodologies to teach and reach our children. Also, lastly, when we think about advancement of 21st century skills, we must take into consideration and include cultural competencies and equity. And we say that word a lot, but what does it mean to all of us and our families? That fosters a sense of belonging for our students. We must do this work by addressing short and long-term goals of accountability, inclusivity for every child in every classroom in every school for BPS to ensure that our students has the same opportunity to achieve the greatness within them as anybody else. And I said that purposely because I see that everywhere that I look and read all the documents and everything within BPS is a very strong statement. It's also a very strong message of commitment. And it's through this commitment, we will break down the silos that are holding us back. We need to move forward. I'm thankful that I'm here, and I hope to serve our students because my priority are the kids. And I look forward to working with each and every one of you, and I hope to get to know you better and to clearly understand what your expectations are for the Office of Specialized Services, and also for me as a leader within this district to do my very best to really make a difference for our children here in the Boston Public Schools. My motto is teamwork, and I really firmly believe that there is no I in team, and collectively, each and every one of us in this room must make that shift together, because together everyone achieves more. So thank you again for this opportunity, and thank you for allowing me to take care of your children.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much and welcome. We look forward to working with you and your team in support of our students and families. I'll now open it up to our committee for questions and comments. I'm going to start this end. You want us to have a question, comment?
I'd rather not start.
Okay, it's all right.
Well, then I'll take the lead. I know it's kind of late, but I'm going to take the lead here,
Back and forth.
addressing this. First of all, I admire you guys. I am also very, very much interested in issues regarding students with disability. I lived through it. I lived through it with my children. And I remember the times that I struggle and I have to fight with Boston Public School, which I'm now a member of the chair. You know, regarding the kind of IEP and all these acronyms, you know, dealing with my child. So I'm very happy that you're here, and I'm happy that you are really trying to make a difference, trying to improve the system in any way that you can.
Thank you.
Just one question to the chair. Do we have a subcommittee on disability, students with disability, aside from the GAP and all that? We don't.
No, not a formal, like a task force, like the L task force.
Right.
SPEDPAC serves for us as a voice of feedback and collaboration.
Right, okay. But I heard from you a little while ago that you were hoping to see some kind of a subcommittee coming off this committee, or is that something that I misconstrue?
No, one of the changes that we're making at the board level for SPEDPAC is moving into a subcommittee structure.
I see.
So that we are able to break out all of the tremendous amount of work that we have. I mean, these 4 strategic initiatives, it doesn't mean all the other work that we need to do is not a priority, because these are just the 4 that we as a board could agree were doable, were high priority, and that we had a high probability of success on actually getting some movement with. But key to that is understanding how we're going to delegate work on the board, and that means creating a formal subcommittee structure.
Yes.
The chair of subcommittee, who would be, depending upon what the issue is and what you guys are working on, would be reaching out to you to say, hey, if you want input, if we have a specific question, can we get some feedback from you? You'd be hearing from individual board members, and we hope with this subcommittee structure that we can bring non-board members from the community in to give them a voice, so that you can hear from them and we can hear from them, because there's 12,000 different perspectives out there, at least, minimum. And we need, in an ideal world, we'd be hearing from all of them and learning from all of them.
Okay.
So.
The monthly meeting that you have.
Yes, sir.
What time do you have it? Around what time of the day you? What time of the day?
Around 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock in the evening.
In the evening.
Oh, good. That's my time.
Oh, good. Well, glad we picked that one then.
Please keep my contact information. I like to attend.
Yes, sir.
I like to attend.
Thank you.
I like to, contribute as much as I can to your work, because
We appreciate that, because
Yeah,
honestly,
yeah.
we can't do our job without you. I mean, in a very real sense.
whether there is any conflict with the rest, I'll take it. Don't worry.
Well, I was saying to Kelsey that the meetings are virtual. And like the whole process with the pandemic, I think that it gives us an opportunity to engage more families So the meetings are virtual, and also we'll make sure
Yeah.
that you have the access to the links.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, at this
online.
point, we're getting upwards of 300 people to a meeting, so it's,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're very welcome, thank
Thank
you.
you.
I have a number of questions, but I will,
Okay, we'll
but
come
I
back.
would rather ask you in person.
We'll
Thank
send you an invite.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. You go this way.
Thank you for the presentation. Certainly appreciate the intentionality like behind it. I really just have a couple of questions. One's more about, I would say, the historical context, how you all have worked with BPS in the past. Because I get the sense that, you know, I'm hearing a lot of the words like siloed, and it seems like two separate entities that have been trying to communicate and really weave together, but it for whatever reason, it hasn't coalesced, and that hasn't been realized in the way that you're talking about it today. So I am curious about the history of that first. And then the second is what is your first touch point for families? You know, I'm envisioning something, a new parent that doesn't know anything per se about what supports are out there, and saying like, hey, I want to register, I want to see if my child can be evaluated to some degree. How do I know you exist now as
Right.
like, where's the communication that says I should go to you all as
Right.
a resource?
Right, right. So historically, you're right, there is siloing, but BPS is the Titanic, right? There's a lot of different storerooms and departments, and there's a lot of siloing within BPS itself. So by necessity, for a group like ours, it's been very much a matter of us adapting what we do and how we do it around where are the silos within BPS. I'm happy to say that the silos, although they still exist, there's a lot more horizontal movement between those silos than there has been in the past. But come on, any large organization is going to have silos because everybody can't do everything. You're gonna have responsibilities, you're gonna have deliverables, and you're gonna have to focus on what you do. And we just need to accept that and work accordingly. So we're gonna create some silos of our own, I guess, with our subcommittees. I'm not sure if that's a good idea now, but,
Well,
but historically, that's true. But as for how do people find out, what's the touch point?
Well, it's a really great question because it speaks again to a real partnership opportunity, because we can do all that we can to, between newsletters and sort of more, I don't know, old school sort of outreach that we robustly participate in. Honestly, one of the new things we've done, which sounds so elementary, frankly, but we're really excited about, is we are starting to sort of capture and, I'm not sure if that's the right word, gather and organize data about our families who are contacting us in whatever way. They are emailing us, they are calling us, they've found out from a friend at school or a special ed sort of program how to get in touch with us. And what we are doing, rather than just trying to solve or triage an immediate thing they may have brought to our attention that they're hoping to be connected with someone in special ed or someone at BPS to help them solve, we're really trying to utilize their strengths at the same time and encourage them to understand you have more knowledge on this topic than you realize. Mm-hmm. We need you. And at the BPS level, what we're really working on in partnership, again, with lots of folks here, is really getting the message out to school level leadership that we are available. So through COSAs, so that whether an IEP meeting is a touch point for someone at the school level to say, this is available to you, utilize it. So we're really trying to create partnerships that make sense around how we can sort of touch the most number of people in the soonest possible way. And sometimes that includes putting flyers in lunch bags, and sometimes it includes actually asking of BPS staff and teachers, we're asking you to literally go even above and beyond what you already have and find us 5 or 10 families that you think could really benefit from what we can offer. Find them, connect us with them. And then, so So we're working really hard at that. But you're right, that a lot of things come in a very old-fashioned way, and one of the things we're most excited about is being sure that we set an extraordinarily high bar for how soon we respond to anyone who comes our way. And we hope that word will be spread as well. So we're really excited about that as a standard.
Kelsey, in one of our meetings, excuse me, Jack, you also talked about hosting in some community events and also maybe opportunities in visiting some of our schools.
Yeah.
To sort of provide some.
Thank you.
And that's integral to letting staff know this is who we are. I mean, most teachers know that there's a thing called Sped Pack, but I get a lot of questions. Well, what do you guys really do? And I'm kind of surprised. Oh, excuse me. I will say, though, on a more granular level, around specifically your question, there are calls that go out to the special ed community every month about our meeting. There are flyers. We have a monthly newsletter, which I believe at this point we're getting 64% open rate, which from the marketing people are telling us that is an extraordinary high engagement level. We also have representatives on school site councils, which we really need to focus on because we need to reinvigorate that. And then there are the engagements with individual schools.
Yes.
It's a multi-variant approach to letting people know who we are, where we are, and how we can help them.
And
It's
as
never
Deputy
enough,
Seal mentioned, that some of those most critical, I should have mentioned it right out of the gate, but thank you. Those social opportunities, as we call them, sound just like fun in the Sundays. These, remember again, these are days, as superintendent was kind enough to come to one of them last year. We host a couple of those a year, and resource fairs, things like that. But remembering that for our families, these are often the only times, other than school, where they will ever find their way to one another. Because as I said, we end up, there's a lot of people staying at home that have lots of challenges about getting out. Those are fantastic opportunities for them to meet leadership and really meet the people they hear us talking about, and they're really excited to do it.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation, and welcome to BPS as well.
Yeah.
I also appreciate anyone who talks about the overuse of acronyms here, mostly because I think, real talk, like acronyms are a way of gatekeeping, and so we have a big problem when someone new sort of recognizes up front, there's just an over-reliance on that because it's hard to catch up. And I'm with you. It has been a struggle for me too. But I want to thank you guys for your presentation. You should do a master class in how to do these. I think it's one of the few presentations we've had that have been without script, without someone just reading something to us. And I was on the edge of my seat, really listening and hearing your perspective and how you think about this work, but also how much passion you bring to it. And the community is lucky to have you guys. And I think on multiple levels, right, the affinity space that you create for parents who have kids with disabilities and the community that you can bring to that, but then obviously the more obvious advocacy work that you're here to do, it just means a lot. And so I really am thankful for your service and for everything you do for our kids.
Thank you for
and this
saying that.
work is very close to my heart. And so thank you. I have some questions for you guys. Excuse me. I'll start, I guess, and this is more for the BPS leadership, but it's a piece that I'm taking away. Anyone who listens to these meetings know, actually even earlier tonight, I'm often talking about how families find out information around the programs without having to take on the labor of intense research. And so I think hearing that, we can have that conversation across so many different layers, right? Earlier tonight, we're talking about AP classes, and later tonight, we're talking about special education services and program offerings. There continues to be this sort of rallying cry around publishing annual criteria or annual program details around particular schools, and I guess I'm going to keep pushing on this question. Where does that live in our priorities, and when can we get there?
Yeah, his question. That's a great question.
So I think there's a couple of things. I think the detail of information that we're talking about kind of partnering around, which is programmatic seats,
Yep.
what's available, you know, in which schools and so forth. That's kind of one layer, and then I think programmatic offerings are different. I think the guide has leaned toward much more around programmatic offerings. It's the opportunity for whether they're using the online system or whether they're using the printed to be able to find those things. The problem with the printed is it's static. So as things change, you can't, which is why we sort of push toward the website, but that can have its own barrier to some families who might not be as comfortable. I think as you probably also experience, there's no one way to reach families.
Right.
You have to find this way and that way and that way and that way. So the more we have alliance working together to get the information out relative to special education, the more successful parents will be in being able to access it. So I think learning from each other in this way of what we've tried, what you've tried, and particularly as we go into this inclusive learning plan, this is to me going to be the crux of this, is how do we communicate this in simple ways to our families so they're not overwhelmed by it, they know what it means for them, they know what to do with the information. This is going to be the partnership, right, of kind of carving that forward.
Well, and two, even if we could give you, even BPS could give you a categorical listing of all programs, all strands, all available seats. Not to give anything away or spoil surprises, but you'll see in the inclusion plan that one of the proposals is to recategorize some of the focus down from 13 to 7. So that necessarily is going to change how this information is provided to parents. So let's talk again in December.
Yeah, I do think there is a piece here though where it's like we will need to push out that information from a marketing level in many different avenues, but there has to be a one-stop shop for families, and that also has to recognize that families are operating oftentimes with multiple kids. And so like they're not just doing research for their kid with a disability, they're also thinking about their fourth grader who doesn't have a disability. And that needs to be as simple of an experience as possible. And it doesn't have to be as detailed as how many available seats are in a place. But I should know if this school is worth exploring for my family given what has been happening there historically.
You know, a really cool thing, since we're here and asking, it'd be great to have a tool, basically an expert intelligence tool. That's a fancy word, but it's just a web page where parents could say, this is a program I want, this is how old my kid is, this is a diagnosis, show me the schools, show me the programs.
Yeah.
So that they can just be proactive about, well, let me go get the information, and then there'd be links to say, here's the special ed director for that school, here's the program director, this is the people you should go and talk to. Would you like to schedule an IEP meeting? You know, you can take it, you can add as many bells and whistles as you want, but it's a pretty simple dashboard, and the corporate world's been doing this. This is a solved problem. Just throwing that out there.
I like it.
Great.
I have another question, and I guess this goes more to the inclusion plan. We have had one presentation, if I remember correctly, and this is before your time, so this is also like, what's next for us as we're thinking about this rollout. But we've had a presentation in which like some scenarios around building utilization classroom models, not services, were modeled. But we haven't had real conversations around the timeline, the full timeline for implementation, as well as the budget, like what this sort of costs big picture. And I'm curious, when should we anticipate that conversation, and how does this all sort of lay on top of each other as we're thinking about the work of SPEDPAC and also the work of special education reform?
Well, I think that for the October 18th meeting, we'll definitely be getting into much more detail about kind of the next several years and what that's going to look like. I think part of the fluidity of this is to something Jack said earlier, which is there's going to need to be substantially separate programming, right? Self-contained programming. Where those are, from a regional standpoint, are things being worked out. But there's going to have to be that choice. In many ways, we're going to have to maintain a dual system, right? Especially in the beginning.
Yeah.
As parents learn more about inclusion, trust in what inclusion is, and as the IEP teams see that as a viable option for students. So that is going to make it, right, a little messy and less clear than everybody would like, both from a resource standpoint and a building space standpoint, which is why we've kind of said all along, this is really complex.
Yeah.
You know, this is where there isn't a place you can sort of point to nationally and say, oh, they did it.
Yeah.
And they did it really well, you know, or in our state, they did it and they did it really well. We are a vanguard in this, which is why it is so important to be working together so that families, we're able to hear back from the families what the areas of clarity is needed or confusion is, how to be able to interpret the information. And then as we're doing our planning, to be able to consider the factors, right, that might be our blind spots or that we don't know. So I think the October 18th will bring certainly like kind of at the, you know, at the eye doctor when you're testing your vision and they kind of flip through and all of a sudden it gets a little clearer and a little clearer and a little clearer. I think that is what October 18th will provide as the plan, you know, gets presented. But keeping in mind that as we go out to years 3, 4, and 5 of that plan, there's going to be some refinements that are going to need to be made in terms of how we absorb this change as an organization and a community.
I'd point to, one of the speakers during general public comment, a woman pointed out that we've got some very old stock. Our buildings are beautiful, but they're configured in ways that make assumptions about what a class is, who's in that particular classroom, and how it's configured. Which means that ultimately, you know, the joke about in the community about, oh, the BPS's biennial facilities plan. Well, this is going to definitely impact facilities as we move forward to inclusion, because if you want a team teaching environment and those two classrooms can't intercommunicate except through the busy hallway, how are you exactly going to work that out? So you've got some facilities problems that you're going to be facing, I think.
If I can, one of the things I found interesting in Dr. Chen's most recent presentation, I think that was yesterday, right, was also the importance of really talking about, I don't know, it's another elephant in the room, I suppose, but about a mindset shift, which again isn't the word we throw around a lot, but in terms of why it matters for even these building configurations and all those kind of pragmatic features is because we've also got to really understand that for our general ed population, this is a shift for them that is extraordinary, and we can't minimize what that means for them. While at the same time, we can't for a second, take a proverbial back seat to what that means. But it really speaks to the shift I think Dr. Chen was saying is a real priority, but the way it needs to play out is we need to actively and early be engaging our general ed families, many of whom have had lots of experience with inclusion, and very happily so. We need to be finding them and saying, what do you like about this? Because when we talk about who's actually going to be in the room, what kinds of kids are going to be included with what other kind of kids, and I mean, to be perfectly blunt, if you have a room that's exciting also to the general education kids, you don't have to sell any buy-in because everybody's excited about something that serves it, you know. So I'm just saying it's really, I think that piece of community engagement also, not just always thinking we need to lean into the special ed crew to get their blessing, but we also really need to foster what our values are as BPS and assert at all times that we're interested in everybody's buy-in, but we will never leave those special ed kids behind. They'll never again be in the back of the bus, ever.
You know, any childhood development neurologist, physician will tell you, a psychiatrist will tell you that, you know, when a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old confronts tragedy in the family, that fundamentally the first question is this going to happen to me? Am I safe? Am I okay? And you as a parent or caregiver need to assure them, you know, it's okay. Grandma passed away, grandma was sick, she had a great life, she loved you very much, but you'll be okay, you're fine, right? If we're talking about inclusion from a very young age, we're talking about kids coming into a classroom and there's somebody over there who is very, very different. Is that going to happen to me? Is there something wrong with me that I don't recognize or know? There's a level of engagement that I think we need to engage in. Engagement, geez, I did it again. That I think is non-trivial, and I hope that you would take that into consideration when you're talking about inclusion, because it really gets down to a very, very fundamental level about what inclusion is at its base, which is saying we all need opportunities, and we all need to be heard and accepted, and it starts at a very young age.
We have talked about this here, right? Like, there's the structural changes that need to happen to create an equitable system. But there's the mindset work. Like, this is a system that has really had like a sort of perverse framework around disabled people and where they belong and where they don't belong and how we include and how we don't include. That is incredibly antiquated. It has surprised me when I moved to Boston to sort of see a city that is on the forefront of so much be so far behind in how they think about disabled folks. And yes, I think that's exactly it. It's like, it's less about like the fragility of non-disabled people and more about the safety of our disabled students who are going to be integrated into new environments, and we want to make sure that that integration happens in a way where their psychological safety is maintained.
But I think, but it's also the psychological safety of the kids who aren't disabled, because they need to know they're safe. They need to know they're okay.
Absolutely.
And that you can embrace the other and discover the other is actually just you in a different guise. I mean, I don't want to get all existential or psychiatric here, but in a very real sense, that I think is where the mind shift is understanding that, you know, you are your brother's keeper.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely, thank you.
Quiero decirle que muchas gracias por el trabajo que están haciendo. Una presentación que fue con amor, con el corazón y mucha pasión. Lo felicito.
I just wanted to say thank you for all the work that you've been doing, and also the presentation that you just gave. You gave the presentation with a lot of love, with a lot of passion from your heart.
Los estudiantes con altas necesidades especiales tienen asimismo muchas necesidades especiales, mejores programas, mejores seguimientos.
So students with high need, special needs, they need a higher standard of programs for their higher needs that they have.
Y las familias necesitan apoyo, necesitan saber cómo lidiar estas cuestiones cuando llegan al distrito con niños con altas necesidades.
And these families, they need support. They need to know how to figure it out with all of these issues when they have children with high special needs.
Y tengo una pregunta. Cuando ustedes hacen sus reuniones, tengo entendido que es los jueves, un jueves del mes, ¿verdad? La próxima es mañana.
And I have a question for you about your meetings, your monthly meetings. You do it on Thursdays, right? Once a month on Thursdays, and your next one is tomorrow?
Yes. En estas reuniones, las familias tienen un espacio para poder presentar situaciones particulares que estén pasando.
During your meetings, do families have a space to talk about their individual challenges that they have?
Well, what an excellent question.
Wow, that's a
that
great
was
question.
we not only do they have a space, they've always had a space, to be clear. But that's been a really, a vital priority. But we've usually structured these meetings to be around, a certain topic. Let's say tomorrow's happens to be about, the IEP process. So we've always carved out space for families to ask all the questions they have. But what we're changing this year, and we're really excited about it, and it will be our inaugural, moment when we have the first meeting to see how it works out. What we have found is that our families, by the time they're usually engaging with BPS or at the school level, we find just anecdotally and from also all of our collective personal experience, by the time someone is calling, someone in your office or anywhere, they have tried to solve it on their own for so long that by the time they get to somebody's office, they're usually really eager to talk about the 17 other things, that are really, really at top of mind and can't wait. We're providing a space in our meeting for families to talk about whatever those things are, get their top of mind moments and address them in the meeting, because we always say, if you're having that question, to what you were saying about acronyms, whatever it is, or the thing again that's keeping you up at night that you haven't yet been able to say to your school leader, or you don't know who to bring it to, you can bring it here. And we're carving out a separate space just for that. So if you come to a meeting about IEP process, then at the end, you need to say, I don't know how to ask this, but I can't get my son a new wheelchair. Or where am I going to go to learn about my Medicaid benefits? We may not be able to solve it in our meeting, but we are making an absolute commitment to connecting our families with resources around all those little ancillary details, and we'll do the best we can. But yes, that space is important, and it's rolling out.
And ma'am, if I can make an observation specifically about the ELL community. I had the honor of spending 3 weeks as a substitute ELL teacher in the middle schools for a largely Dominican group of kids. And let me tell you, those kids are, I'm gonna get choked up. Those kids are so awesome. I mean, they bring an energy and a creativity and a love that I have never seen. And I realized I was almost sort of a culture shock, because I had so many assumptions about what school is supposed to be like, coming from my Anglo background, that I met a couple of different classes of these kids, and I realized, oh, no. Classrooms can be different. Classrooms can be organized differently. But I will tell you that there were some kids there that, in my completely non-professional opinion, definitely had some special needs. There was at least 2 kids that I'm convinced had dyslexia, and there's a couple kids that had some trauma in their background, and there's a couple kids that I suspected were on the spectrum. And I would talk to teachers, and they'd recognize that, but they're ELL teachers. And so, what I saw for myself, and this is my own, there's nothing clinical, this is just anecdote, that the foreign language issues seem in some certain cases to be masking the special needs issues. And I would love to see an effort made specifically to target that and to disentangle what's a language hindrance and what's actually a special need hindrance. Because you need to address both, or you're not going to address either.
And that's why it's so fundamental to make sure that we do comprehensive evaluations to determine what the exclusionary factors are, especially for our multilingual learners.
Yep, and to do it in their language, with their cultural sensitivities. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Diego?
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you for the presentation. This also hits pretty close to home.
Yep.
4 to 6 people in my family, depending on what you count as a disability, do have disabilities. So it's,
Yep.
yeah. But, no, what you were saying is completely, like, I've had friends who didn't get their autism diagnosis till they were 16.
Yep, you got
because, who didn't get an ADHD diagnosis.
Yep.
Because, and that definitely happens, especially with all that situations. I'm just kind of, frankly, my whole takeaway from this was I'm I'm sad I didn't know about it sooner.
Well, thank you, Diego. And let me tell you, I didn't get my ADHD diagnosis till I was 29. It made a tremendous difference in my life.
My mom says that too, because she got it when she was like 27, I think.
Yeah, no, and it was a life changer. But I'll tell you, Diego, you know, I remember years ago, I believe you might have been at this meeting, Ms. Robinson. We were doing, I'm trying to remember, it was a biennial facilities meeting, and the school committee graciously agreed to meet at English High for a community meeting. And Dr. Johnson, the superintendent at the time, who was a wonderful, wonderful woman, was running it. And there's lots of feedback from the community, the neighborhood. And this one woman, middle-aged African-American, in the back of the room, she stood up and she said, I don't know what to do. The schools have come and said my child has autism. I don't know what that is. They said I have to have some kind of a meeting and talk about his plan. I don't know what that is. And I don't have time, and I'm a single parent, and I'm at a complete loss. I don't know what to do. And Dr. Johnson, if you knew her, would be totally not surprised about this. She just collapsed. She was like, oh my God, I am so sorry that you have gotten no support. I can't, okay, what's your son's name? What do you do? How old is your son? And she said, my son is 17. Now that was a dozen years ago.
Or more.
And I'm gonna believe that that's probably still happens. But the changes that I've seen in BPS since then would lead me to believe that that's actually, I should hope, rare now. But that experience of your friend is not alone. That's yes, they're not alone. That he's in good company.
Diego, thank you for also being brave enough to say that you liked hearing the lens on something in the way that you did. It's you can help us to be an ambassador, and perhaps.
Yeah. Your voice is important. It needs to be heard.
And the most important thing that we need to do for our students is to really help them to develop self-advocacy skills. To be the voice to really explain to their teachers, this is how I learn best. You know, can you teach me in this way? I'm more visual. I need more hands-on. So that's part of the work as special educators, to make sure that we teach our students to be self-advocates for themselves. To have their voice shared.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to both of you. I'm a parent of a now 47-year-old child that went through BPS with medical and some learning disabilities, so I know well the fight. I was impressed to hear that you have over 300 parents who are attending by Zoom. And we also know that you said that 12,000? 12,000. So I guess the question is, how do we get to the other 900? You know, who are they? I mean, I know full well the ability to be there, et cetera, but worry about those who are out there trying to get this done alone in isolation and not knowing where to go next.
I love, Madam Chair, I love that you remarked on that, most specifically because I do remember even during COVID, you know, when we were doing all of this, right, on Zoom, and the level of desperation for our special ed families, including those who would try to make meetings like these. And I remember thinking, and I'm sure it wasn't my finest moment, to be honest, at the time, saying, you know, everyone was so desperate, saying to BPS, we're seeing these few families on the screen, right, with all of their medically fragile children, literally right behind them in the frame. Yeah. You can see who we're talking about. Yep. And I remember saying at the time, you know, this is worrisome enough, but if I could wave a magic wand and every single, you know, exceptional person who's working at special ed could call 10 of these families tomorrow that we're not hearing from, because it's the families we are not hearing from that we would love to get to, but that's what haunts me, is every frame in the Zoom I see 100 more of that face. And you know, again, we've taken up far too much of your time already, but there is something to be said for some of that more organic, even old school outreach.
Retail politics.
Yes,
Yeah.
that really
Yeah.
does need to be a part of all of what we're working on. When we haven't heard from families or seen them, or you know, are partnering with, you know, with I don't know, whether it's transportation
Yeah.
or the COSAs, those are the families we have to spend 90% of our work being sure that they hear from us.
Yeah, and a lot of it is cultural work, in all honesty. When I was chair the last time, 12 dozen years ago, we had two board members, one in the Haitian community and one in the Cantonese community. And those two communities had very, very different attitudes towards disability among their children and how they spoke about it. And so, you know, I wanted to do outreach. Hey, let's go talk about it. Well, no, that's not how it works. That's not the right approach. And so I had to learn that actually my set of assumptions about how communities work and how outreach works and what the set of assumptions are does not apply. So I think a lot of it is learning on our part.
Yeah.
But obviously working with you to say, you know, how do we bring communities together in the way that they want to be brought together, not in the way that we expect them to. And because if we're expecting them to operate by our means, well, I can tell you right now, we're gonna fail, because that's just not the way to do it.
No, I agree in terms of looking at the uniqueness of our cultures and how some of our cultures may think having a disability is stigmatizing. You know, I think we talk about outreach through our healthcare systems, through our pediatricians, through our healthcare centers, to really provide resources, information to families where they are and where they go would be really helpful. But I think that some of our shift when we talk about infrastructure and we talked about multi-tier systems of support, that's where we start. So we need to be proactive and not reactive. So we need to make sure that we provide those wraparound supports for all of our students in terms of what those universal practices are for Tier 1, in terms of looking at it not through the lens of disability, but look at it through the lens of level of need, academically as well as social emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
And another factor that we're dealing with and is a real concern is also looking at the mental health needs of our students and our families. You know, so putting around those wraparound supports is going to be crucial, and I think that's part of the work that we must take on as a district.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There's a final consideration, I think, in reaching out to those people. There is an underlying assumption, and unfortunately, I did see this in the inclusion plan. And the underlying assumption is that a special needs designation is bad, that's a negative. It's not. I remember reading a book when my son was first diagnosed, a physician over at Children's Hospital, and he said sometimes he feels like the affluent people in Boston and the outlying suburbs, that they trot their kids in to try to get a neurological diagnosis that will give them an IEP so that the kids will actually get more services out in Wellesley and Weston and Weymouth and all the W towns, which is the polar opposite of the assumptions that we have here. I want to say that giving a kid a diagnosis and putting them on an IEP is not only an acceptance of reality, but it's giving them a leg up, because it's recognizing you do deserve more help. You do deserve an extra investment on our part. You do deserve our help. And it's not your problem, it's our problem, because you're a person, you're not a problem. And we need to figure out our problem so that we can treat you as a person and address you that way.
I'm saying this with all of the respect. The services have to then match.
Well, but it's not just the services, it's the accommodations.
All of it. We are not living up to that promise, which is why, to be fair, so many people fear that reality of their child being on an IEP. I'm going to be in a sub-separate classroom. I'm going to have a sub-separate experience. I'm naming both things to be true.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I've had.
You're right. Yeah, I mean, I was that family. I'm uncharacteristically, you know, not proud of it. You then realize Madam Chair, you refer to your own family experience about that as well. But I mean, you do go through. This is the other sort of lens we have to apply here. the number of years lost to being in a denial program about what your child needs is also its own, no, I mean, it's really its own tenure that we just have to factor into when a child actually starts getting the services they're entitled to, their needs met. There's usually been a duration of time where the parent, you know, has understandably thought, this is not happening, or some version. So I appreciate that. I think that's
There's
accurate.
also,
We've been-
there's also fear. One of the most common conversations we'll have when we get a call on our hotline is I'm a single parent, or I'm a parent, we're poor, we have a problem, I don't know if I can say that I'm having a problem, because if I say I'm having difficulty managing my child, they might take my child away. The Damocles sword of a 51A hanging over a family with a child with special needs is very real, and it's a real inhibitor for families from actually going out and seeking services and reaching out for help, because they think that their cry for help will mean they lose their child. So
It's a really
huge,
important truth. It's true.
huge hurdle for us to overcome. Because I can't tell them now, and I've had at least 2 of these conversations in the past 2 weeks with parents, I can't tell them, you're wrong. I can't look them in the eye and say, no, everything will be okay, because I don't know that that's true. So I don't know, how do we work on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are, I think these are just the complexities that we have to learn,
absolutely.
right, with each other. And as superintendent, I can just say that I look forward to the time when parents don't have to feel that they have to fight for the services and the supports and the accommodations for their kids.
Right.
And I think I have a lot of hope, both in the leadership that we are forming within special education, certainly Kay being here, and your leadership in this committees, that we can get there. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very, very
Thank you for
much.
having us.
We appreciate it. Come to our meetings, we'd love to see you, and I'm taking you up on that, Mr. Tran. Seriously, and as a fellow retiree, I just,
Thank you. Committee looks forward to future updates.
thank you very much.
also very
Thank you for
much.
your time. Have a good night.
We'll now move on to public comment on reports. Ms. Sullivan?
Thank you. We have no speakers for public comment.
Thank you. New business?
I have more or less like one thing, but I think it's indicative of what we've sort of heard throughout the evening regarding the structural changes. But I think I've already spoken about this with you, but I think about what are the things that we do as a committee to even hear. This is actually one of the first I would say closer to being a conversation about something, which is where I think we get the most engagement and understanding of what each other are feeling without having to navigate open meeting law and having to go through that process. And so I think it starts thinking, we start thinking about the recommendations that we set forth now at 2 retreats where we said we need to change the structure of our own meetings. We ourselves identified that our own meeting structure is ineffective at producing the changes that we want to see, so let's change it. And that means the format of how presentations can come to us so that we can have more robust conversation and dialogue, and inclusive dialogue, particularly hearing from task forces. I know John Mudd here has talked about this at great length, about becoming more about how presentation should be formatted. That's a conversation, but then how we're bringing in those voices to us, so it's not like, I don't know, I feel like we're like the Supreme Court or something up here, and that's not how I operate. I really operate by just sitting among people and having a dialogue, because I don't understand what's in everyone's head, and I'm smart enough to know that I'm not the smartest person in the room. I need to hear from everyone in here to some degree. So I think it's really a charge to us just to reformat how these meetings really take place and who we get to hear from. And so we can engage with them just more easily. And that's just that's my thought about how I think we can start as a committee in just changing the way that the meetings are formatted. So.
One, I appreciate that, and I'm excited about the retreat to be able to have that conversation and sort of blow up the way this has always been done, and think about ways where it feels more responsive to who the current membership of this body also is. I think to your point, it's just like the way that we are naturally wanting to engage in a different kind of way. I do have 3 new business things. Some we may talk about, some I am asking to be future agenda items. I am curious around the sort of broader capital planning conversation that we had at the last meeting. I think this week is sort of interesting because it only sort of doubles down on the need for more dialogue here, at least with us as a body, from the conversation around MCAS outcomes to the SPEDPAC conversation and how we're thinking about our buildings. And sorry, I'm distracted by the exits. I'm just gonna wait for the door to close. So I guess what I'm asking here, like, what I heard from the last meeting was about a rubric used to evaluate or assess facilities conditions, but I didn't hear, we've been having this conversation as a body around a master plan, and so I didn't hear like when that is happening, like when we will actually get closer to a master plan, and then like, or capital improvement plan, or a timeline or goals around that. And so I just don't know when, and I keep going back to this tonight, like as we're going into budget conversations, it seems sort of silly that we don't have any more clarity around when that facilities plan will happen than we did this time last year, or at least I don't feel like I have any more clarity around it.
So I think, as we know, there's this tension point of developing a plan absent of community voice. And so what we've kind of said all along is that there were some key pieces, such as the facilities condition assessment, the design studies, that needed to be flushed out so that those could become public. What became clear in the planning work that we did this summer was that there really needs to be a decision-making rubric so that the community can understand how we're taking and applying all that information so that they can see the same information that we're using, and then be able to know what's within their decision power and what the information says needs to happen. We did not want to make additional decisions without first having that rubric completed and having it be built on community engagement, which is the process that's being done right now. Having it come before this body and having this body vote on it, to then be able to use it for starting in the later winter and spring. Part of our SIP requirement is a long-term facilities plan, but we've been in dialogue with DESE and clear with DESE that will be clarity and exploration of those key components and the rubric, which together will be used to formulate the actual decisions of that master facilities plan. That will be a multi-year plan, right?
Yeah, of
right,
course.
as we know.
Of course.
To your point, the off-cycle issue of this, right, is we do enrollment early, we do budget early, and there's really not a way to easily resolve having a community process that's truthfully like authentic, get the feedback, develop the rubric, all within a time to hit every mark there. That said, I think in the spring, there will be some things that we can work with the rubric to apply that are smaller decisions that I think with the community can be good proof of concept, right? And then certainly an acceleration using that rubric in the next 2 budget cycles.
That's helpful timeline. I guess the question that I think I'm still confused about is like if I'm a teacher using a rubric, let's sort of perfect setting for this this version of a rubric. I'm telling students it's this is your score out of 100, right? And so like you got an 85 or you got a 90. But we're going through a rubric process without telling people what the score could be. We have enough information, I suspect, to speculate the ways others have around how many buildings are overutilized, how many classrooms are overutilized, how many, and what it would take to right size the district in multiple variations. And so I guess I'm confused on like the process. This is where I think I am lost. Like, so I go through this rubric and its engagement, but am I really being engaged if we know we have to close 12 schools? There is no way to keep the system at its current operating cost without some sort of reconfiguration. What is my investment to go through this process without that? Do you know what I'm saying? And like, when does that become like, I mean, like, back to what we were just talking about the shift in the way the meeting, like on some real talk. Like, when do we real talk the conversation? It's like we're 48,000 students. We are operationalizing a system built for 70,000. I don't know, I'm making it up. But like, when do you have that conversation in relationship to all these other things that we're talking about, like what we're hearing from what we just had, the conversation we had with SpedPAC as we're thinking about what it would take to run an inclusive system, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's, if it was literally just about the efficiency of seats, then you could do like a very linear process. But unfortunately, it's not. It has to do with looking at our city and regions, looking at areas of the city that have been divested and not wanting to further do that, coming up with solutions that are both local and regional when it comes to things like special education. And so there's a lot of tension points that the system that we develop has to be able to address. And so because of that, it is complex and it is complex to understand, and yet we have to be able to do it in a way that people can plug in and understand what the information is we're looking at. It is on, and I'll ask Megan, what date is it slated for us to talk more about the FCA? Next week, okay. Right, so that would be the meeting to be able to dig in more to this.
And I appreciate this, and I think we're probably on the same page. This is not a one conversation. It's actually a continuous conversation that we're having all the time here to make meaning of what is inherently complex, but you can also imagine like the tension folks are having predates my time on this committee, but from Build BPS to today of like, I feel like we've been here before and we're not that much clearer. So I appreciate you letting me use this time to talk about it. My last one, and this is it for tonight, another small one, which is about exam school admissions. We will start going into the enrollment process soon with information sessions for families. I am committed as a member to localizing those 10 points to income eligible families and not giving families or students 10 points for going to school with kids like me who are poor. But I want to see the young folks who, regardless of what school they go to, who are economically disadvantaged receiving the points instead of looking at schools as either ghettoized or not, and deserving of some, right? Like, I mean, because that's on some level what it inherently does. And so I'm like, every week I am bringing this up.
Yeah, so the exam school conversation is slated for the first week of October, yeah. Yeah. So that's why October, as I said to you, October is a heavy month. This month in September is our data collection, and so there's a little bit of a lag there. Like, we would have loved to be able to front load some of this, but the data is just not gonna be ready for it. So the next week will be one of those conversations that has a lot of meat to it.
I appreciate it. Last, and we don't even have to respond to it, but for our next update, can we talk about the Shaw-Taylor engagement process and just what's happening with the mergers and consolidations that are currently underway, and just
Absolutely. I think Chief Stanislaus can give an update to that.
awesome. Thank you. New business, we used it.
That includes our business for this evening. The next hybrid school committee meeting will take place next Wednesday on October 4th at 6 p.m. here in the Boulding Building. That following evening, Thursday, October 5th at 6 p.m., the committee will host an in-person retreat here at the Boulding Building. The session will be facilitated by Dr. Ray Hart, Executive Director of the Council of Great City Schools. Retreat will give members an opportunity to reconnect, review our goals and metrics, and position us for a successful school year. Retreat will not be broadcast. We're meeting up on the 6th floor, but it will be open to the public. If there's nothing further, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Is there any objection to approving the motion by unanimous consent? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all, and have a good night.
Thanks, Chair.